The Monster of Gotham. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51 Dawn. In the spiritual world, everything has its own trajectory of action. As the master of the spiritual world, Lizu can only watch the illusions in the spiritual world change on their own like a bystander. The air is a little cold, but the body is hot. The stars began to move to the right place, and the spiritual world seemed to be a little different. A strange murmur came from a very far away place, with a strange melody. Lizu scratched his ears, trying to clean the filth in the ear canal, so that he could hear the vague sound clearly. But it was in vain. He couldn't hear the murmur in the dark. The voice was praising the name of the weird person. If he could hear what the voice said clearly, he would definitely lose more. Finally, when the unknown black meat cloud covering his head was blown away by the wind, the illusion in front of Lizu changed again. The spiritual world exuding a weird atmosphere has disappeared, and the air has become familiar. Lizu returned to the chapel of Blackgate Prison. In front of him, the copperhead snake was like an angry cat, lying on the ground and glaring at him. Whoosh, there was wind blowing by his ear, and Lizu was hit hard before he could dodge. His face was burning with pain, and he also caught a glimpse of that nimble figure, another copperhead snake. The illusion made the number of copperhead snakes in front of Lizu increase from 2 to 50 quickly, and the number was still growing. Do you see the fear in your heart? More than 50 copperhead snakes surrounded Lizu and formed an impenetrable human wall. They stood up from the ground confidently and walked slowly towards Lizu. I heard your screams of pain just now. It must be terrible. This group of guys with women's breasts and faces, but physiologically judged to be male, crowded around Lizu, grabbing Lizu's body with their hands and feet, like shackles firmly locking him. They really have the ability to kill Lizu in an instant. Even without the suppression of mental toxins, Lizu's strength would seem insignificant when encountering a fighting master like the copperhead snake. But Lizu's reaction was very wrong, as if he was not afraid of the difference in strength at all. Why is he motionless? The copperhead snake frowned. Lizu's reaction was indeed like being poisoned by his own special toxin, but his calm appearance was indeed incomprehensible. Can you give me another punch? Lizu invited. No matter which one, I believe you will not be stingy with your fists. Ah, I see you. You are here. In the eyes of the copperhead snake, Lizu was turning his neck and looking around blankly. The direction he pointed at was completely wrong. His spiritual world was still chaotic, but the strange confidence in his heart kept Lizu from panicking. Then send you to death. The copperhead snake raised his fist and hit Lizu's chest. He didn't want to kill him with one blow. It seemed that keeping Lizu's life would bring him more fun. This punch also happened to make Lizu's chest hurt so much that he couldn't move, but it didn't endanger his life. What's more, it was just a punch. Could he tell who was real and who was fake? The copperhead snake's fist hit Lizu's body, and with one punch, Lizu was knocked out. Gilulu, roll away. It didn't stop until its back hit the wall. Lizu spat out a mouthful of blood, and his 2 rows of blood-stained teeth were exposed. Ha 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 ha. He grinned and climbed up on his knees. What are you laughing at? The copperhead snake felt more and more anxious. He pounced on Lizu again, his fist pointed directly at Lizu's head, and he was ready to kill him with one blow. Boom! Exclamation mark. The iron hammer hit the pumpkin, and the dull sound made people tremble with fear. But this time it was a little different. Although Lizu was still knocked away by a punch, the difference was that the copperhead snake's fist hit Lizu's palm and then pressed Lizu's palm to hit his head. Cough cough ha ha. Lizu climbed up with a dry cough, and a large mouthful of blood overflowed, gathering on the ground. I hate you crazy people the most. The copperhead snake looked at Lizu with disgust. He raised his right fist, but the severe pain attracted his attention. The copperhead snake's right hand has become a toy. Puff! Exclamation mark. The toy arm fell off, and blood gushed out. The copperhead snake's eyes were red, and he held his broken arm and looked up at Lizu. It's not easy to catch you. Lizu was still laughing at the air. He was still under the influence of the poison and couldn't tell the true position of the copperhead snake. But now the copperhead snake didn't dare to underestimate Lizu. Lizu used his injury to determine the position of the copperhead snake with pain, and used his strange toy-like ability to reverse the situation of the two sides in an instant. Compared with what the copperhead snake lost, Lizu was only hit by a few punches. It seems that someone has to leave early. When Lizu stood up again with blood spitting out, he was holding two toy guns under his left and right armpits. The next moment, the toy guns turned into life harvesters that spit flames, and Lizu was pushed by the recoil of the guns to spin. Bang 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 bang. The irregular rain of bullets spread all over the chapel. Ha 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 ha. He laughed wildly amid the sound of gunfire. Lizu had emptied his bullets and dropped his gun with a strange laugh. In his spiritual world, the copperheads were still showing off their might, but one of them was shot and fell to the ground, but did not disappear. Sorry, Lizu ignored the copperheads that were gesturing at him, walked through their waving fists and feet, walked to the copperhead on the ground and squatted down. You don't meet my collection standards. Bang. Crash. The black shadow broke through the window of the chapel and fell in with glass fragments reflecting the morning light. Batman landed, looked at Lizu who was kneeling on the ground and laughing, and rushed over quickly. Morning has arrived. Bullet holes spread from the floor to the door, and then moved to the ceiling. You are poisoned. Batman walked to the kneeling Lizu. Huh. Lizu raised his head and looked at Batman. The Joker and Bane have been arrested. Now only you are left, Toyman. Batman seemed to have long been accustomed to the endless stream of supervillains in this city. He caught criminals with ease and told them with his fists, no matter what supervillains they are, Batman is still the source of fear for these villains. I have to reiterate one more thing, I'm not the Joker subordinate now. I work alone. Really? Batman obviously didn't care about this answer. He walked towards Lizu and wanted to catch him. However, the body of the copperhead snake on the ground, the broken arm, and the plastic toy hand beside him made him a little more energetic. Remember to say hello to the Joker for me. Lizu lowered his head and smiled silently. He shrugged his shoulders quickly. We will definitely meet again, but next time I hope he can join my toy game. And of course you. Batman Time and Space Gate opened. Lizu disappeared. Thank you for the reward of 500 Kidian coins. Thank you for the reward of 100 Kidian coins. Thank you for the reward of 100 Kidian coins. Chapter 52. Expressionless. After being shot in the abdomen, Sheriff Gordon kneeled the Joker in revenge, covered his wound, and rushed to the chapel. That bastard can turn toys into weapons. God knows what kind of terrible ability this is, especially in the hands of a madman. Doesn't it mean that the other party has an endless supply of weapons? He came to the front of the chapel. It was quiet here. Hiss. Sheriff Gordon squeezed the bullet sight with his left hand and raised his pistol with his right hand. He used his hand to push the door open. Squeak. The heavy chapel door slowly opened under the pressure of Sheriff Gordon's weight. The door was facing the broken window. The golden sunlight was dazzling, and Gordon couldn't help squinting. When he got used to the golden light, he could see the things in the chapel clearly. The morning sun shone in through the broken window and fell on the dark night. The golden light covered him with a layer of gold-plated armor. Batman was standing on a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, watching him quietly. This is... Gordon looked at the pile of corpses on the ground, moved his throat, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The Toyman is very cunning, but according to my investigation, there is someone else who killed these people. Batman's brief answer explained the reason for the tragic situation in front of him. As the world's #1 detective, Batman can easily restore the whole story of the development of the matter. He never needs to wrongly accuse anyone. In any case, the Toyman is indeed a bastard. Batman said to Sheriff Gordon, it seems that we will continue to cooperate in the future. Cooperation with a criminal? Gordon raised his pistol and pointed the gun at Batman. As a sheriff, my duty does not allow me to cooperate with a lawbreaker. Even if Christmas's pacification of the criminals was entirely due to Batman's power, Sheriff Gordon would not allow himself to cooperate with lawbreakers. That would be a trampling on the law. Beep. A voice came from the intercom. This is Harvey, Sheriff Gordon. The situation in the prison has been suppressed. After contacting Warden Joseph, we took counter-attack measures. Very good. Wait until I finish dealing with things here. Gordon just lowered his head and replied to the intercom. When he raised his head alertly, the black figure in front of him had disappeared. Damn it. Sheriff Gordon? The voice on the other end asked strangely. Wait till I get back. That night, Christmas Eve, there was a riot in Blackgate Prison in Gotham City. Black Mask kidnapped and killed the police chief and the warden. Not only that, a psychopathic thug named Joker and a person with strange abilities who called himself Toyman suddenly appeared in the city. No one knew their past. They seemed to have appeared out of thin air. They caused the collapse of a skyscraper. The supervillains gathered. Because of them vented terror wantonly in the city. Batman solved it all. Except for the Toyman who disappeared strangely in the chapel of Blackgate Prison. Everyone else was arrested. After a simple bandage and suturing of the wound, Sheriff Gordon climbed up from the bed. He pushed away the nurse who wanted to stop him, opened the door of the ambulance and walked down. Give me a car. I want to go back to the police station. There is still no news from the police station, and the Toyman was left in the police station by himself before that. His daughter is in the police station. Barbara, a key was handed over. Thank you, Dent. Gordon nodded to the young man and drove away. Gotham Police Station. Bang. Gordon broke open the door. Gordon, are you injured? Just a minor injury. Gordon looked around and asked, where's Barbara? She's sleeping upstairs. Huh, that's good. Gordon breathed a sigh of relief. What's wrong? What happened? The police officer asked curiously. Gordon's relieved expression seemed to deliberately arouse people's curiosity. Remember the yellow-skinned boy who came to report the case tonight? You mean the one with the Santa hat? Someone immediately remembered. Toyman. Gordon nodded and said, he can turn toys into weapons. He's a complete bastard. It seems that gun-type toys will also be contraband in this city in the future. At the stairs, the girl who was happily holding the toy gun had a livid face. Toy man. Lizu suddenly opened his eyes. Strange ceiling. He sat up straight. The bed was a bit hard, so it was more comfortable to sit. The white room was not big, reflecting the incandescent light from the top of the head. Very monotonous. The bedsheet was also white, as if nothing other than white could fit in here. On the bedside table, which was also a monotonous color, there was a glass of cooled purified water. Space-time portal, cooling down, 760H. The space-time portal had been opened, and he should be in a completely new world now. World exploration degree. 0%. Lizu supported the bed with his palms, and slowly turned around. He stood up barefoot on the ground. The injuries on his body had disappeared, including the neurotoxin brought to him by the copperhead snake. After leaving that world, he seemed to have been reborn. This room had windows, but the windows were covered with white blackout paper, blocking the view outside. Lizu walked to the bedroom door and turned it. An expressionless face appeared outside the door, and eyes without emotion calmly stared at him. The man held a black plate in his right hand, on which was toast, a bread knife, and a white sauce that made people lose their appetite. In his left hand, he held a yellow potion. It's time. First, get the injection, then eat. The man put his hands in front of Lizu, and his eyes without any emotion, stared at Lizu quietly. Lizu took the medicine and the tray. This is District 16. You fell at the door of my house. A voice without any emotion came from the side. It was a little girl wearing only a single black long skirt. She had her bright golden hair meticulously groomed, but it was so not bright. The little girl also stared at Lizu with the same emotionless eyes. Someone will come here to take you away soon. Before that, you must get the injection first. As she was speaking, the little girl suddenly raised her hand. She held a black syringe in her right hand. After changing her left hand to a bottle of yellow medicine, she expressionlessly inserted the syringe into her neck vein and slowly pushed with her fingers. The medicine was successfully injected. The man standing next to the little girl also took out the injection and stabbed his neck. They were as calm as robots. Lizu recalled that only those bastards who fell in a pool of blood could be so calm. After the injection, they stared at Lizu, apparently waiting for Lizu to inject the medicine. Of course. Lizu reached out to the little girl and said, I'll borrow yours for a bit. After he got the little girl's syringe, he changed the medicine, unbuttoned his shirt, and inserted the syringe into his arm. I've had skin allergies on my neck lately, so I'll change the place to inject. Lizu explained. Pushing slowly, the medicine was completely injected. Chapter 53 Felony. Thank you. Li Zhu returned the syringe to the girl and nodded very gently. Marilyn, remember to pick up your medicine later. The man ordered expressionlessly. It's very important. Yes. From the bland tone of the conversation between the two, it is difficult to guess the relationship between them. Is there a toilet? My stomach is a little uncomfortable. Maybe there is something wrong with the trip. Li Zhu pointed at his stomach and shifted his gaze from the little girl Marilyn to the man's bland face. The man nodded gently. Bang. Li Zhu leaned against the closed toilet door and breathed rapidly. His nostrils expanded and his face was livid. Sweat was flowing uncontrollably from his temples, sliding over his chin, dripping down and hitting his chest, soaking his clothes. Sweat beads fell on his eyelashes, blurring his vision. Grabbing a handful of sweat on his face, taking a few more quick breaths, Li Zhu finally opened his eyes. Hey. Directly opposite was a mirror, which completely reproduced his upper body. Embarrassed and sweating profusely. S's. The sound of rain in the bathroom also stopped. Outside the bathroom, the police waited for more than a minute. He heard the sound of rain in the bathroom disappear, but he didn't hear any movement. So he raised his hand and knocked on the door again. Knock knock. Hello? Still no answer. The police turned his head back and cast an inquiring look at his partner. The partner slowly pulled out the pistol from his waist and nodded in response. Hello, we are the police of the church. The police reached out to grab the bathroom door handle and twisted it. No response. Going, the police calmly stepped back and raised his gun to aim at the door handle. Puff, a gunshot. The door lock was broken. The police held the gun in his right hand and squeezed in sideways with his left arm against the bathroom door. He turned around quickly, his neck quickly turned to take in everything in the narrow bathroom. The bathroom was only 2 square meters, and the bathroom window was open. It was not difficult to guess where the uninvited guest went. The ground was wet, with stagnant water mixed with hair and blood. There was also a pile of torn clothes on the ground. Is he injured? The police stepped back and asked the father and daughter. No, the man shook his head. What is this? Another policeman's voice came. He raised his hand, holding a piece of blood-stained rubber in his hand. Very strange material. The policeman scraped a little yellow liquid on the mirror and sniffed it gently. It's medicine. Contact the priest immediately. Criminal? Another person asked. Yes, it's the criminal. 15 minutes have passed. Li Zhu was hiding in the bushes naked, and his right hand was holding the clothes he had just stolen from his neighbor's house. The sound of sirens came from far away. After the sound of gunfire, the surrounding police were like dogs hearing a bell, swarming in, completely surrounding the area and making it difficult for Li Zhu to move. He changed his clothes carefully in the bushes, scratched his half-dried black hair, and walked out swaggeringly. A police car drove towards him, with red and blue police lights flashing. 2 burly policemen sat in the car, and they were patrolling passers-by. I'm an illegal resident. Li Zhu raised his head and took in the surrounding scene. The towering city walls completely surrounded the city, and the giant towers stood like giant thighs in the center of the city for dozens of miles. The police car passed by, and Li Zhu looked at the 2 policemen very calmly. His eyes did not waver. He even had the chance to show a very annoying smile. The atmosphere suddenly became serious. Pedestrians on both sides began to flee, running away expressionlessly. The police car braked and stopped. The 2 quickly opened the door and rushed down, aiming at Li Zhu at the first time. This is 3rd Avenue. Criminals found. Repeat, this is 3rd Avenue. Criminals found. With 2 guns pointed at his head, Li Zhu did not choose to run away, but honestly raised his hands. 2 policemen rushed over quickly, one on the left and one on the right, grabbed Li Zhu's wrists and forcefully pinned his wrists behind his back and then handcuffed him. Mr. Police, are you mistaken? The faster the heartbeat, the brighter the smile. From the perspective of the onlookers, a madman laughing crazily was pinned down by 2 policemen at the front of the car. The crazy laughter seemed to break through this calm world. You're already under arrest. The 2 policemen spoke very calmly. Li Zhu was violently pushed into the police car, his head hitting the seat, his butt sticking out, but he was still laughing. After the 2 policemen got in the car began to drive slowly. Where am I going next? Prison or hard labor? Li Zhu turned his head to look at the scenery passing by the window. The empty white paint, the streets without any beautification, everyone was wearing monotonous black. Lee Su blinked hard and turned his head away from the monotonous and boring scenery. The atmosphere in the police car was still dull. "You have your own way of leaving this world," said the policeman driving. "Ha ha 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 ha, it's really interesting." Lee Su laughed with his head raised. The police car, which was moving, was forced to crash into the street lamp by bullets and blood at the first moment it passed the traffic light. Bang! The car stopped at an angle. The smoking door was pushed open, and a pale Scandinavian youth with blood on his face staggered out of the car, holding a gun. He fell to the ground. After losing his footing, he stood up again, leaning on his rifle, in the horrified eyes of passers-by. Cough cough cough. Lee Su coughed, and the car hood was already smoking. Police sirens were coming from all sides. The car stopped, blocking 4 intersections. When the car stopped, a man wearing strange uniforms and combed back hair walked to the front. Without exception, they all had expressionless faces. Lee Su fumbled in his pocket and took out 5 toy soldiers. Looking at the serious policeman, he couldn't help but grin. The world is serious enough, why not smile more? "Thank you Jiang Hu, I'm here for the 100 starting coins reward." "Thank you Yang Fei for the 100 starting coins reward." "Thank you BNI, you come for the 100 starting coins reward." Chapter 54, Su Crossing's toy. In front of the police car, a man in black uniform and with a slicked back hair stared at Lee Su. Under the cold white wall reflecting the sunlight, Lee Su seemed so out of place with everything here. The people here always have a serious face, and they can't see anger, smiles, or fear. Lee Su recalled the simple folk Gotham, the night when Christmas Eve turned into Christmas. He also recalled the world after the Third World War. In the end, he could only get one answer: this world is broken. Behind the defensive wall formed by police cars, the car doors were open to serve as temporary shelters, and the police are behind them. Even though it seemed that Lee Su had no dangerous weapons except for a few toys in his hands, this group of people seemed to be naturally cautious and alert, without any arrogance, and very cautious. The world is serious enough, why not smile more? Lee Su ignored the dozen guns pointed at his head and raised 5 soldier toys. At that moment, everyone's eyes shifted to Lee Su's palm. After seeing the toy soldier in his hand, they all showed disgusted expressions, as if what he held in his hand was not a toy, but a deadly poison. Interesting, Lee Su's smile became even brighter. It was not because he was laughing pathologically, but because he really felt that this world was very interesting. The man with the slicked back hair said criminal, and rushed towards Lee Su. The speed was very fast, and the distance between the two was rapidly shortened. Criminal? Lee Su looked up at the toy soldier in his hand in surprise, thinking about the origin of the toy and the sacrifice behind it. He nodded seriously. "I admit it. If you don't kill me, I really hope to hire a lawyer." While he was still saying words that only he could understand, the man had already rushed to Lee Su at an extremely fast speed and swung his right hand, and a flash of light appeared. It was like a sharp knife coming out of its sheath and slashing towards Lee Su's head. Clang! The flash of light was blocked by the meat saw reflecting the oily light, and the flash of light was only a fist away from Lee Su's head. Lee Su held the meat saw in his hand and temporarily gained the upper hand by virtue of its weight. He held the toy soldier in his other hand and let out a long sigh. "I was almost killed by you with the advantage of the weight of the meat saw." The man almost knocked Lee Su away and knocked him to the ground. The man in front of him was completely a human bull. Lee Su also had the opportunity to see the true face of the flash in the other party's hand. It was a black pistol, and the barrel was specially lengthened and modified to ensure a longer range and higher accuracy. The top of the pistol had a strange armor, which forcibly added a sense of heaviness, like a small hammer. It looked like a weapon deliberately made for close combat. It was not only a pistol, but also a short knife. "I know a guy who likes to take drugs, and likes to backfuck people. You should know him, but he doesn't like to make his hair shiny like you do. He seems to have no hair, ha 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 ha." Lee Su told a joke that only he could understand for the time being. His mouth was only 2 fingers away from the other person's face, and he laughed happily. "Humph." The man snorted coldly, raised his right foot, and kicked Lee Su back before he could react. At the same time, he quickly turned the muzzle of the gun and aimed it at Lee Su's head. Without the slightest hesitation or frown, he fired decisively. Bang. Ding. The bullet happened to hit the meat saw. The man turned sideways and turned the muzzle of the gun while pulling the trigger and aiming at Lee Su's head. His goal was to kill Lee Su directly. But Lee Su, who was stumbling back like a mime actor, suddenly flipped up. His body was as flexible as a circus trapeze artist, moving with fancy movements to avoid the bullets that could take his life at any time. Bang 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 bang, 4 gunshots, except for the second bullet that brought a string of blood on his arm. There was no result. As Lee Su flipped in the air, the meat saw was thrown out violently, cutting straight to the man's neck. The man subconsciously bent down to avoid it, and the meat saw flew past his hair, chopped on the police car, and chopped into the open car door. The police hiding behind the car door stared at the shark tooth meat saw only 0.5 inches away from his chest. There was still blood and dried meat slices hanging on it. Ha 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 ha. Welcome to Wake Up. The man heard Lee Su's undisguised laughter and felt something was wrong. When he raised his head, he found that there were suddenly 5 fully armed soldiers with high-tech equipment in front of Lee Su. Lee Su pointed at the 5 fully armed soldiers from a distance, smiled strangely and gave an order. Shoot, kill them. After that, he twisted his waist and ran away. His running posture was very funny. He almost fell down. These 5 soldiers came from the Flashpoint world, a military base where Superman was imprisoned. They met Lee Su, who was about to sneak into the base, and were turned into toys. They woke up more than 1,000 hours later. Intruder. The 5 people looked at Lee Su and naturally remembered his identity. After all, for them, everything happened in a flash. The man with the slicked back hair did not chase Lee Su. He looked at the 5 fully armed soldiers with vigilance. They were equipped with high-tech equipment that he had never seen before. Just from the appearance, they were full of powerful and aggressive weapons. Solve them all at once. The man stepped forward, and when the 5 soldiers turned their heads strangely to look at Lee Su, he threw his hands and fired. Puff! A brilliant blood flower exploded from the forehead of the soldier in front. The man turned halfway, as if stepping on an elegant dance step, and threw the strange pistol in his right hand to his left hand. Bang! Puff! The second soldier fell in a pool of blood. Bang, bang, bang! Exclamation mark. 5 shots. 5 people fell to the ground. Everything happened in just a moment. The 5 soldiers standing still were like 5 living targets. All of them were knocked down by the man's amazing gun skills. The man with slicked back hair had no interest in paying attention to the bodies on the ground. He glanced at Lee Su, who was still staggering away, and chased him at high speed. We are under attack. Counterattack. Counterattack. Just after running a dozen steps, the man suddenly heard a roar from the pile of corpses. Then, the deafening sound of gunfire swept through the intersection like a storm. 2 police cars were hit by stray bullets on the fuel tanks, and a huge mushroom cloud rose into the sky. Boom. The heat wave came over and pushed the man back. He raised his arm to cover his face and turned his head to see that there were 2 seriously injured soldiers among the corpses. They howled and fired. Puff, puff! The man threw out the long gun in his sleeve, and 2 bullets turned the soldiers into corpses forever. Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you for the 500 starting coins reward. Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you 8 for the 100 starting coins reward. The long road ahead is as hard as iron, but now we start over again. I wish the motherland a happy birthday, and I wish everyone a happy National Day. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Water Gun. Lee Su ran forward in a panic and funny way. Behind him was a bastard who was as strong as an ox and killed without blinking an eye. He was surrounded by heavy soldiers on both sides. His target naturally looked forward, where there were only 2 police cars and 4 policemen defending the road. Boom. A huge prop box fell from the sky and landed on the road that Lee Su had to pass. The 4 policemen in front had already opened fire, and the bullets easily penetrated the wooden box, and a few bullets grazed Lee Su's face. Wait, don't break my toys. Lee Zhu shouted anxiously, but of course no one paid attention to his words. Lee Zhu hid behind the prop box, grabbed something from the wooden box, kicked the box, and the prop box disappeared. In the eyes of the 4 policemen, the wooden box that appeared out of thin air suddenly disappeared, and Lee Zhu, with 2 toy guns under his armpits, stood up coolly. His arms and clothes were soaked in blood, but he had a cool smile on his face, and there was a mushroom cloud rising behind him. It was ridiculous and cool. But the 4 policemen couldn't laugh. They saw with their own eyes that the 5 toy soldiers turned into 5 living people. Where are the 2 toy guns? Nancy Clive raised her gun and tried to aim at the other person's head. She had arrested many criminals, but the criminal in front of her was different from every criminal she had ever seen. Who has ever seen a criminal who can turn toys into living people? She couldn't even find the right words in her mind to describe this ability. No. To be more precise, she shouldn't think now. Killing the criminal and ending this group of guys carrying war pathogens again is her top priority. Even if she saw a scene far beyond her cognition, she would not be afraid, let alone hesitate. Today, or now, her brain actually began to speculate and think in many ways. Nancy Clive shook her head, threw away the random thoughts in her mind, and regained her spirit. Aim, shoot, all in one go. The only difference is that the bullet did not hit the guy who looked a little funny while running. Not only her, but even her companions shot the same. The bullets didn't hit. Every one of them didn't hit. A huge wooden box fell from the sky, and the criminal took out 2 toy guns from it and pointed them at Nancy Clive and her colleagues. In an instant, the toys changed their appearance, from brightly colored plastic to hot weapons that could easily take people's lives. The criminal didn't seem to be very good at using hot weapons. His posture of holding the gun was very awkward. He was an absolute novice. Both his arms were injured, but he pulled the trigger at the same time. The muzzle pointed at the ground burst into flames, and the bullets sprayed out from in front of his toes. The powerful thrust pushed the muzzle to sweep towards Nancy. The muzzle did not stop there, but swept up to the sky. Thump, 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 thump. No bullet hit, but there was a crackling sound from the police car, and there was a crash. The car window must have been broken by the bullet. Nancy, who was hiding behind the car door, thought so. In such a powerful bullet spray, Nancy and the other 4 could only huddle behind the police car that served as a cover and dared not show their heads. When the bullet spray stopped, Nancy leaned out with the gun raised. The figure with the sun on his back had already covered her with his shadow. Don't move, lady. The voice was deliberately lowered, with a bit of a joke. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots. The 3 policemen who climbed up from the back of the police car were hit by ruthless bullets. Her companion was knocked down by the bullets, and Nancy immediately woke up from the strange state just now. She quickly raised her hand to grab the barrel of the gun and prepared to fight back. The criminal had injured both hands, and he had just fired a gun and endured a huge recoil of the gun. The injury was compounded, and his arm strength must be very small. This might also be the last chance to fight back. Police officer Nancy hadn't grabbed the barrel of the gun yet, but she caught a glimpse of the other party pulling the trigger. What will happen next? Will the hot bullet engulf her? Pain or relief? What is the world after death like? At this moment, Nancy actually entered that strange state again. For some reason, she still wanted to laugh. The laughter really came, but it didn't come from the corner of Nancy's mouth that was about to rise, but from the mouth of the criminal. He was laughing. Sizzle. The cold water poured on Nancy's face. The gun that could reap lives became a toy again. Well, it seems you can still cooperate. He looked at Nancy with satisfaction as her face was splashed by the water gun and her pupils shook violently. Can you help me? I seem to be injured. Take me to the nearest hospital. Thank you. The water gun was pointed at Nancy Clive's head. Will it spray out clear water or hot bullets in the next moment? The police car full of bullet holes drove away, and the man who had just dealt with 5 soldiers stopped where he was. Pastor Patji, the policeman who was responsible for chasing Lee Zhu at the beginning, walked to the man with the slicked back hair. He has held one of our policemen hostage, and he has a lot of contraband in his hands. Do you want to ask for help? Pastor Patji turned his head slightly, and he said expressionlessly, no. He wanted to chase him himself. We have informed your partner that Priest Preston will arrive soon. The church leaders also hope that you can wait for Priest Preston to act together. The police looked at Priest Pat G calmly. It was obvious that he had no intention of following the priest's orders from the beginning. Priest Pat G also looked at him expressionlessly. I will solve all problems before John comes. Hospital. If it were not for the strong smell of disinfectant, Lizu would definitely think that this place was a public toilet. The church will not let you go. The female police officer voluntarily helped Lizu into the hospital. What's your name? Lizu's attitude seemed to be completely unconcerned about the bad face of the female police officer. On the contrary, the worse the female police officer's face was, the happier he was. Lizu was thrown heavily to the ground. The female police officer grabbed the holster on her waist. It was empty. She remembered that her gun had been taken away from her at the beginning. Are you looking for this? Lizu held a pistol in his hand. The owner of the pistol should have belonged to the female police officer, Nancy Clive. Give it back to you. He threw the pistol back to the female police officer. The policewoman caught the pistol, and it felt heavy in her hand. She was sure that it was a weapon that could kill people. Without hesitation, she fired. A stream of water spurted out from the muzzle of the gun, soaking Lizu's face. Pooh. Poor Lizu grabbed a handful of water from his face and sat up with his elbows on the ground. We are even now. Policewoman Nancy looked down again and found that her pistol had become a toy. Cheap plastic texture. Can you help me contact a doctor? It would be best if you can help me remove the bullet here. He pointed at his arm, which was still bleeding. Nancy stared at him expressionlessly. Forget it. I'll do it myself. Lizu staggered to his feet, and he reached out to grab the gun from the policewoman's hand. He raised the pistol above his head, and bang. This time it was a real gun. Chapter 56. Can you tell a joke? The chandelier hanging from the ceiling was smashed, and with a crash sound, the broken chandelier glass fell all over the floor. Crystal fragments and the freed tungsten filaments jumped on the ground. The nurses, patients, and doctors in the hospital all turned around calmly after hearing the gunshots, and looked at Lizu with calm eyes. There was no emotion in their eyes, and they maintained an orderly rhythm. As if encountering a disaster in the textbook, everyone raised their hands calmly to ensure that they were willing to cooperate. This feeling is really bad. Lizu wrinkled his nose with some disgust. After taking a deep breath, he said with disgust and disgust, sick world. There was no fear or emotion on everyone's face. Even if Lizu was a criminal with a pistol, who could take their lives at any time, they would still look at him with that calm expression. No running, no hiding. Compared with this weird world, he still missed Gotham. At least the people there were not so stingy when screaming and laughing. Next time I go back, just kill Batman and the Joker. Lizu rubbed his nose with the back of his hand and glanced at the bright red back of his hand. It was a nosebleed. The cost of continuous use of his abilities had already been reflected, and he had reached the limit of his use. Bang! Lizu fired another shot, hitting the calf of the man who was calm and ready to run away. The man fell to the ground holding his calf. He cried out in pain when he was injured, but there was still no anger in his eyes, let alone fear. I thought you wouldn't feel any pain. Lizu pointed his gun at a young nurse. She had big eyes and a high nose bridge. She was very beautiful, but unfortunately she looked like a puppet. Can you do me a favor? Ding! The bullet was taken out by the sterilized tweezers. Lizu was sweating profusely and bit the gauze in his mouth tightly. It was not until the nurse helped him disinfect and wrapped him with ointment and gauze that he let out a heavy breath. It happened that at this time, the sound of sirens came from all directions and surrounded the hospital. The nurse had been pushed out of the door by Lizu, and only Lizu and the female police officer were left in the room. Lizu, whose arms were wrapped in gauze like white dumplings, turned around in the ward and stopped in front of a strange painting. In the painting, a gal in the moonlight was struggling to climb a high tower. He raised his hands and tried to hold the moonlight that was sparsely sprinkled outside the tower. There was also a smile on that hideous face. The terrifying painting made Lizu feel for the first time that the world was a little normal. Miss Police Officer, can you go out and tell me a message? Lizu smiled and turned his head, looking at the policewoman Nancy Clive, who had never moved in the corner. The police car braked suddenly and stopped in front of the hospital. Priest Pat G got out of the car, and he had already grabbed a pistol in his hand. On both sides of the door, doctors and patients had lined up to greet him. They had the same calm expression as Pat G. Priest, there is a criminal inside. He has kidnapped a policeman and a nurse. As he was speaking, the nurse had already fled quickly and tried to get into the crowd. Wait. Priest Pat G raised his hand and stopped the pistol in front of the nurse's slender neck. Priest, sir? The nurse looked at Priest Pat G. The two looked at each other, and their pupils were like a lake with a stone thrown into it, rippling gently. Are you scared? Priest Pat G asked in a low voice. The nurse's eyes were still shaking gently. After a pause of 1 second, she said, no, priest. Let this lady leave as soon as possible. We can't embarrass a kidnapped person. Pat G put down his gun and asked the nurse to leave. At the same time, he gave a big order to the police behind him, asking them not to stop the nurse from leaving. Pat G glanced around at the patients and doctors who were evacuating in an orderly manner under the organization of the police with cold eyes, and said, the criminal has a strange ability. He can turn contraband into weapons. Unauthorized action will cause unnecessary casualties. He went straight to the hospital gate and said, I will go in first. You wait for the signal. Priest Preston is on his way, said the police behind him. But Pat G didn't pay any attention to his meaning. Pat G walked into the empty hall of the hospital. The floor was full of crystal chandelier fragments. Creak. The tungsten filament was crushed under his leather shoes. Priest Pat G lowered his head and stared at his leather shoes for 2 seconds until he raised his head when he heard footsteps approaching from a distance. Priest, the police officer Nancy Clive, who was held hostage by the criminal, walked calmly in front of Pat G. Where is the criminal? Pat G didn't seem to be in a hurry. In the medical room. He was injured, said the female police officer Nancy. He asked me to bring a message. What? Pat G asked curiously. The female police officer said, this is what he asked me to bring. Unexpected message. Pat G was confused at first, and then froze. Curiosity should not appear in this cold world. Officer, you can go out and rest first, and leave the next thing to me, Pat G ordered. You will kill the criminal, right? The female police officer did not leave immediately, but asked back. Facing her cold expression, Pat G nodded. Of course now, the only people left in the entire hospital were Pat G, the priest, and the criminal Lizu hiding in the medical room. One of them didn't chase, and the other didn't run away. They met in the medical room, just as the policewoman Nancy said. Squeaky when Pat G pushed open the door. Lizu, with his arms wrapped in bandages, stood in front of the wall, facing the door sideways, and didn't care about the priest Pat G who pushed the door in. Priest Pat G put the gun on the table at the entrance. You're not running away. He showed his attitude. He had no hostility. I thought people in this world had no feelings. Lizu's eyes finally moved away from the wall, and he smiled brightly. You deliberately shot a few shots that were off center. It must have wasted a lot of energy, right? Pat G stood at the door. The police have surrounded this place, and the strongest priest Preston is on the way here. You can't escape. Really? The box appeared out of thin air. Lizu bent down slowly and searched in the prop box. Unfortunately, there was not much stuff in it. In addition to Harley Quinn and the feminist Hawkgirl, there were only 2 guns. Preston never hesitates to kill. You should be thankful that your ability is very useful to the resistance. Pat G said calmly. Resistance? Lizu barely understood some news about this world. He grabbed the gun and walked to the corner. Bang, bang, bang! Exclamation mark. Suddenly, the gun was fired. The glass shattered. He dropped the gun, grabbed the heavy red fire axe, and turned to Pat G with a strange look on his face and said, my knife is gone. I have to get something else, but I see that it takes a lot of effort to pick it up. Pat G pointed at Lizu. Lizu's injured arms couldn't lift the fire axe at all. He could only lean sideways and drag the fire axe on the ground. I should go. Lizu dragged the axe forward, grabbed 2 more medical first aid kits, and threw them into his prop box. When the 2 passed by, Pat G suddenly said, can you tell a joke? Thank you, the ultimate formation of the great military advisor, for the 500 starting coins reward, and thank you Jack Zhao for the 100 starting coins reward. Chapter 57 Priest. Ha 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 ha. The laughter was getting farther and farther away. After the figure holding the plastic toy axe disappeared at the corner of the corridor, the sound was instantly erased. In the medical room, Priest Patji, who was standing at the door, retracted his gaze towards the end of the corridor. The smell of disinfectant brought his consciousness back. Alcohol was splashed all over the walls, the tables, and the room. Crash, the portrait on the wall was also splashed with alcohol. Patji looked up at the portrait. Staring at the portrait of the priest, the gloomy eyes seemed to want to eat him alive. This portrait was also the only remaining non-contraband. The priest is really narcissistic. Patji's stiff face slowly forced out a smile. It was difficult to force out a smile. He stared at the face for a long time, and finally only a doubt arose in his heart. What was he looking at just now? An incomprehensible weirdo, just like his incomprehensible jokes. What a bad joke. Priest Patji picked up the pistol and walked out of the medical room. He fired back without looking back, and the fire burst into flames. The hot air lifted the priest's robe and burned his hair. It's not a funny joke, but it makes people happy. Recalling that boring joke, Priest Patji felt happy from the bottom of his heart. The fire climbed along the hospital curtains and knocked over the flammable dangerous goods. The fire grew bigger and spread farther. An accidental fire instantly enveloped the entire hospital. Boom boom boom, the flames soared into the sky. When the fire was about to engulf the hospital gate, Priest Patji, holding a pistol, also walked out slowly. A hand patted Patji on the shoulder. It was a man with a thin face and wearing the same clothes as Patji. Thank you for your hard work. His voice was very indifferent, just like those people. How is the situation? It has been eliminated, and the contraband has also been burned. Patji turned his head slightly, and his eyes seemed to see the escaping figure through the flames. Well done, the thin man nodded, and he turned around and sat back in the black car. I received news that a batch of contraband is to be moved. Go back to the meeting and we will deal with them. Wait a minute, Patji said to his partner, I still have something to do. His eyes turned and finally looked at the female police officer who was previously a hostage. Nancy stared at the fire in a daze. She had seen the burning flames countless times, but only now did she feel something other than the scorching heat. She couldn't describe her mood at the moment. That was a criminal, but it brought her an indescribable feeling. Anger, fear, shock, lies. Some negative emotions that are expressly prohibited by law. These emotions are the original sins that triggered the war, but Nancy found that she liked these original sins a little, allowing her to see a more vivid world rather than the unchanging gray. You are not suitable to be a policeman anymore. The voice suddenly came, and Nancy was shocked with heartache. Pastor Patji. The female police officer straightened her back hard, not only making her breasts look more upturned, but also making her look more serious. I can't understand what you are talking about, priest. The policewoman knew that she must not expose her current state, and the priest in front of her was as sharp as a hound's nose in tracking down emotional criminals. Oh, that's right. Hounds are also contraband. This feeling is hard to give up. Priest Patji lowered his head and whispered in the policewoman's ear, don't show any flaws in front of Preston. Priest, you already. The expression on the policewoman's face was no longer controllable. As a priest who hunts down criminals, the most sacred person under the priest, he is actually a criminal himself. And he is lurking beside the strongest priest, Preston. The policewoman's shaking eyes stabilized, and she nodded seriously. Yes, priest. The policewoman left quickly. Watching her leave, Patji secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He really has a strange charm. He can force his emotions to affect the person who injected the drug. He is like an antidote. I really hope that the rebels can seize this opportunity. Back in the car, Patji just leaned back on the chair, and the priest Preston beside him suddenly said, that policewoman. Huh? What's wrong? Patji controlled his heart that was about to jump out of his chest, and while keeping a calm expression, he explained, the policewoman was just caught by the criminal. I went to find her to find out something. Maybe I can find more criminals. You did the right thing. Priest Preston nodded and affirmed. Huh. Patji finally breathed a sigh of relief. What's wrong? His little action still attracted the attention of his partner Preston. Nothing. It took a lot of effort to get rid of that guy just now. He is very similar to the magician in the old world. He is very dangerous. Preston turned his head and looked at his partner, who was a little evasive. At least you solved him. The hospital was already engulfed in flames, but the crowd was unusually calm, watching the fire burn quietly. Lizu had just squeezed into the crowd when a hand suddenly grabbed his wrist. It was a white woman, and her eyes were blue as she looked up at Lizu. "Follow me," she whispered. The two squeezed into the crowd and disappeared completely in the crowd. Another block, 6 miles away from the fire. People acted according to the rules of the law. Green light, stop the car. A man in black leather shoes walked on the sidewalk with a briefcase. Bang, he stepped on the rain grate on the side of the road, and the iron grid shook. Huh. The passerby lowered his head in surprise, looking through the hollow cover to the world in the sewer. There was only a little light, and he couldn't see clearly inside. Beep, the sound of a horn came, calling the man back to his senses, and he sped up and trotted across the road. Lizu raised his head and looked at the pedestrians passing by above his head. He lowered his head again and looked at the woman leading the way. "Are you resistance soldiers hiding here? This is a place that the priest and his lackeys can never imagine. Only here can we live healthily." "Really? How embarrassing." Lizu grinned, with a hint of ridicule in his voice. "There is no other way. As emotional criminals, we will only die if we are caught." The woman took a few quick steps. "The base is just ahead. Hurry up." Not far ahead, traces of human life gradually appeared. The rain grate above the head disappeared, replaced by the rumbling sound of trains. Candles were burning in the small city in the sewer, and the children were running after a black, slightly deflated ball, as if they were in a refugee camp. "This is what the world should be like," the woman introduced happily. She thought that Lizu would be excited when he saw the kind in front of him. Who knew that Lizu just used Sig World to evaluate all this? "Jane, come here." The woman waved to the girl who had just grabbed the deflated ball in the distance. "Take this gentleman to get treated first." The little girl Jane reluctantly put down the ball and walked to Lizu. "Hello, sir. I'm Jane Joyce. Please follow me. I'm going to find our leader to report the situation. After you recover from your injury, Jane will bring you to see us." The woman left, leaving only Lizu and the little girl Jane, as well as the children who were holding the ball in the distance and looking at him with fear. "You can laugh, can't you?" Lizu grabbed the garbage piled up in the sewer, which was a rusty spoon and a frying pan. He shook it violently, and the spoon and the frying pan turned into a balloon. He handed the balloon to Jane and smiled at the children who were eager to try, but too scared to get close. "This world is serious enough. Laugh for a while." Chapter 58, Underground World. Under Zen's guidance, Lizu stopped in front of a narrow room lit by 2 rows of candles. The strong smell of disinfectant hit him in the face with the wind from the exhaust fan. Lizu rubbed his nose. The smell was much stronger than that in the hospital, and there were many indescribable smells. "You sit inside first. I'll go find a doctor." Zen pulled the balloon with her left hand and pulled Lizu's sleeve with her right hand, pulling him into the room full of the smell of disinfectant. She cherished this hard-earned balloon very much, and it was not difficult to see from her sapphire eyes how much she liked Lizu. She had only heard of turning a pile of useless garbage into beautiful and cute toys in some fairy tales. And from the beginning, the children who followed behind him silently also showed how popular Lizu was. Before leaving, Zen stood at the door with her arms open, driving away the children who tried to get in and contact Lizu, the magic man, so that Lizu could heal his wounds in peace. What a sensible girl. Lizu wanted to stretch out his hand to scratch his cheek, but the pain of the action interrupted his arm from raising. He had no choice but to sit still and use his eyes to see the content that only he could see. World Exploration degree. 21% His 2 confrontations with Priest Pat G and his arrival at the Resistance base brought a lot of growth. He also received 2 rewards for exploring the world. Space-time gate, cooling down, countdown. 755 H 34 meters, 10s, summoning item box, basic, 1%, toyization, mastery, 13%, acrobatics, mastery, 0%, aura, influencer resurrection. 1 world exploration to 20%, forcibly improving the mastery of the acrobatics ability, and the reward for the exploration degree reaching 10% is reflected in the space-time gate. Lizu stared at the space-time gate and his consciousness fell into a dark world. He seemed to be sleeping. His body was out of control. Only his mind was running forward at a rapid speed. Soon, a light spot appeared in front of him. When the light spot was enlarged, it was a window. Inside was Gotham. In this world, Lizu had no body, but he was sure that he was laughing. There were footsteps, and Lizu's consciousness was pulled back quickly. He quickly left the window, where he could see Gotham, and got into another lower window. In an instant, his consciousness returned, and Lizu's eyes were always fixed on the time and space gate, as if everything was just an illusion. The footsteps stopped. It was a woman who exuded the smell of medicine. She had black curly hair, and should have the blood of the plateau area. The high nose bridge and dark blue color were very distinctive. Jane said, "You are a very magical person." The woman looked Lizu up and down. "You are really special." "Thank you." Lizu has tried his best to ensure that he does not laugh too happily. "Do you have any tranquilizers here? My heart is beating a little too fast." Overusing his abilities and being injured gave his heart a signal to go crazy, and it began to beat faster and faster. The laughter was hidden in his throat, ready to burst out at any time. Everyone here hates that thing. They would rather be in pain and sad than lose the right to experience it. The woman bent down and unbuttoned Lizu's clothes. "Let me see the wound." She carefully examined Lizu's wound, especially the wound where a large piece of skin had fallen off. After strictly and carefully disinfecting and tidying up the wound, she took out gauze and applied the medicine with a strange smell on it. The smell was exactly the same as the smell Lizu asked in front of the exhaust fan. The woman tied the gauze. "The injury is not serious. The skin injury only needs a week, and the bullet part may take a little longer. I heard that Mary brought you here. Did you just stop taking the medicine?" Her eyes were on the wound on Lizu's arm. It seemed that the smell left there caught her attention. "Stop the medication?" "No, I never inject yellow weird stuff into my body." The reason why he refused to be injected with that strange medicine might be just because the medicine was yellow. The woman didn't understand what he meant, but just nodded. "It's best not to move around for the next 10 days, the woman warned, and waved to the girl holding a red balloon at the door. "Take him away." "Thank you, Martha." The little girl Jane jumped in front of Lizu. She smiled. Her cheeks were like ripe red apples. "I'll take you to find Mary and the others, sir." Leaving the place that should be called the medical room, they walked along the sewer for a distance and stopped in a place that could be called a city. This is a refugee camp. Everyone has a gray scarf on their head. They all have their own jobs, and they are in a hurry. After passing 2 compartments that looked like arsenals emitting a strong smell of gunpowder, they stopped at the door of a narrow sewer compartment. "I brought the person." Jane knocked on the door that was added temporarily and said in a raised voice, "Thank you." The door opened, and it was the woman with blue ocean eyes who led Lizu into the underground world. "You look much better." The woman stepped aside to make way for Lizu. There was only one candle in the room, barely bringing light. A man with yellow hair and tattered clothes walked out from the darkness. He walked up to Lizu. "Hello, I'm Jurgen. It was Mary who received the news from Patji, and it was she who brought you here. We have been observing your actions today." Jurgen's face flushed, and his words were a little excited. "How did you manage to wake people up from the influence of porcelain?" "Jurgen." Mary reminded him in a low voice. "Sorry." Jurgen took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. "I'm really too excited. You are the antidote. The antidote to porcelain." "Porcelain?" Lizu had never heard of this thing, and he was not interested in Jurgen's words. But Jurgen was a good person. After meeting Jurgen, his world exploration level has increased to 24%. "Have you never injected Boxian?" Jurgen turned around, and a voice came from the darkness. "Can't find this person." Lizu also discovered that there was a small door hidden in the darkness, and there was a sound of keyboard tapping behind the door. "Where are you from?" "I don't belong to this world." Lizu was bored with Jurgen's question, and compared to the name of antidote, I like. He shrugged, sat sideways on the table, slowly raised his injured arm, and slapped it on the table. At that moment, the table turned into a toy, including the burning candle. When the light was about to disappear, everything returned to normal. Call me expert. Can you talk about this strange and uncomfortable world? Chapter 59. Yow. At the beginning of the 21st century, the Third World War broke out. The major powers dropped nuclear weapons on each other. The war destroyed the efforts of human civilization. Only a very small number of people survived the war. Among the very few survivors, someone formed a church. The church believes that anger, jealousy, greed, hatred and other emotions are the original sins that cause wars. Without emotions, all wars and tragedies will not happen. The church has developed a drug, Boxian. It can deprive humans of their emotions, as long as it is injected regularly. Of course, there will be no more wars without emotions. Everyone lives in peace. In this world, all paintings, music, games, books and other things that express human emotions are contraband and must be destroyed. Pets, flowers, and even colored lights are not allowed to exist. People who are injected with Boxian will live like zombies, and people like us are called emotional criminals. The church specially trained priests with special combat skills just to kill us. Jurgen stopped, not because the explanation was over, but because Lizu's laughter interrupted him. What are you laughing at? Jurgen asked curiously. No, I just thought of something particularly interesting, and couldn't help laughing. Priest. Lizu thought of Priest Patji, who had superb marksmanship and close combat skills. If Patji hadn't deliberately let him go, the bullet would definitely not have hit his arm. According to Jurgen, priests are like the army before World War III, with a very large number. If everyone has a similar combat power to Patji, it would be a fantasy for the rebels to overthrow the rule of the church. Humans have no emotions and will not cause wars. Lizu jumped off the table, rubbing his fingers. Well, everyone will complete their life's goals according to the goals. What a utopian world in the church. We have Patji as an insider. Jurgen counted his fingers, as if calculating the resistance force he had in his hands. Now we still have you, as long as we can get rid of the priest and completely destroy Boxian's pharmaceutical factory, the world will be free again. Jurgen looked at Lizu. Whether he was an antidote or an expert, as long as he could change this terrible world, he didn't mind Lizu's identity. You want me to help, but you can't let me drag these two arms. Lizu raised his arms and gestured. This is not suitable for action. You're lucky. Jurgen turned around, pushed the door, and walked into the dark compartment. When he came out again, he was holding a document in his hand. This is the formula of the healing agent used by the priests after training. Your hands will definitely heal in just one day. But it's a pity, said Mary with eyes like waves. Medicine is very precious. We are in short supply in the resistance army. Under the premise of ensuring everyone's hygiene and safety, we can't take out too much medicine to make healing agents. Can it cure anything? Lizu grabbed the document and glanced at the handwritten English words on the paper. Severe burns, still have a breath left. What about those who are dying after being hit by bullets in the body? Who else is injured? Jurgen asked. Experts. Of course they need assistance. The villa standing alone in the wilderness of Gotham exploded with blood under the sound of gunfire. The Harley Quinn opened her hand slowly, wanting to hug that figure before she died. Unfortunately, the green-haired figure never looked at her from beginning to end. When her consciousness fell into darkness, she only heard a familiar voice. Sweet dream. Then, she regained consciousness. She quickly regained control of her body. Her skin was dry, as if it was wrapped tightly in plaster, and could not move. Her mouth was also blocked, and she could not open her eyes. Only her nostrils were deliberately opened, so that she would not suffocate to death. Yao began to struggle. The wound on her abdomen should have been painful, but now it was only slightly itchy. Kaka, the plaster wrapped around Yao was broken by her struggle. She reached out and grabbed the plaster piece on her face and tore off the two large pieces of plaster on her chest. In the dim room, only a burning candle brought some light. Yao lowered her head and found that she had just been lying in a large bathtub, and the surface of the bathtub was completely dried plaster. The place on her body that was shot by the clown lady was strangely healed, and there was not even a scar. Zio. The door opened. Toyman. She looked at the person who walked in surprise. Where is this? Awake. Lizu threw the clothes, that the resistance women had mended to Yao Yao and looked at Yao Yao, who was not wearing clothes, with some disdain. "Don't you ever wear underwear?" The clothes he took away were only pants and tops, t-shirts, etc. No underwear. What's the use of wearing that thing? Yao Yao didn't care about Li Zu's gaze, put on the colorful clothes that belonged to Harley Quinn, and put on a bright pink helmet that could show her pink and blue twin ponytails. Yao Yao took out the special yo-yo skillfully and swung it gently. The yo-yo went up and down in her hand. Where is she? It can be seen that Yao Yao didn't mind her shooting at her. Dead what? How did she die? Yao Yao didn't seem to be very sober at this time, because she spoke too normally, like a normal person. With that world, it disappeared forever in a past timeline. Li Zu squatted down and knocked on the plaster in the bathtub. He was very curious about this thing. After knocking twice, Li Zu stood up and said, "Let's go. It's time to work." Harley Quinn was stunned for a moment, then smiled. "Ha ha ha, do you still want to be my boss, toy man? Don't forget that I can easily take off your head with my yo-yo." "What a bad threat. My head definitely can't decorate your yo-yo. However, in order to save you, we have used up all the medicine in the underground world. It's time to do something." "Haha, it just so happens that I seem to have been lying for a long time." Harley Quinn stretched lazily, not caring at all how sexy her thin waist was when she made this move. Li Zu was wearing a green suit, with his left hand in his pocket and a red spray painted fire axe on his right shoulder, swaggering in front. Beside him followed Harley Quinn with twin ponytails, swinging a yo-yo and blowing bubble gum. They were like a weekend outing, jumping and walking out of the underground world. Soon they disappeared at the end of the sewer. At the same time, they were getting closer and closer to the world where emotion is the original sin. In the underground city, among the crowd, Jurgen and Mary watched the backs of Li Zu and the other man leaving. Mary turned around and asked Jurgen, "Can they succeed?" "Of course they can succeed." Jurgen nodded vigorously, his face full of determination to bet the last round. The news from Patchy is that the church has found the warehouse. There are many world artworks in it, and they must not be burned by these emotionless bastards. As long as the two of them can temporarily attract the attention of the church, it will be enough for our people to evacuate the artworks. Thank you Intestine Forging Man for the reward of 1000 starting coins, and thank you Easy to Forget for the reward of 500 starting coins. Chapter 60 Weird Painting. Li Zu and Harley Quinn, wearing bright clothes, walked on the road like neon lights in the dark night. Along the way, they attracted enough attention. The two walked on the road in a swagger, not caring about the eyes at all. Harley Quinn even had the interest to show off her yo-yo skills, but she could only get disappointment. Hop hop. The bubble gum that Harley Quinn blew up was punctured and exploded. The exploded bubble was stuck on her face. The green figure leading the way in front of her suddenly stopped. If the bubble she blew was not big enough, it must not be the bubble that was punctured just now, but her smooth head. "Hey, Barbie boy, you almost killed me," Yo-Yo said with a wrinkled nose. She raised her right hand, and the yo-yo went into her palm along the string. "Really?" Li Zu didn't care that he almost killed his only companion by stopping suddenly. He leaned his shoulder against the wall and pointed out with his left hand. Just behind the corner was a wide highway. Cars drove smoothly, and pedestrians strictly abided by traffic rules. A huge prison-style castle, with 100 or 200 stone steps leading people up. At the end of the steps, hundreds of normal people have already gathered. This is Boxian's medicine distribution station. A group of people are waiting for Boxian to distribute the medicine. If the medicine cannot be injected on time, the source of evil will reoccupy the human brain and war will break out. In order to protect the world and to protect themselves, people will always come to collect the medicine on time. I suddenly feel that you can do this better than me. Li Zu put down the fire axe, rubbed his shoulders, and complained, "This thing is really heavy." Squeak. The yo-yo sank, and the clown girl shook her arms. If she didn't look at the yo-yo spinning at the bottom, she would think she was walking the dog. "What do you want me to do? Blow this place up? Or let them watch a show?" She chewed bubble gum, which exuded a strong strawberry flavor. "I'm not your subordinate, of course." "Of course." Li Zu shrugged, dragging the fire axe and turning around. "Leave it to you to deal with this. I want to find a place to have a good rest. Obviously he didn't listen to Harley Quinn seriously. You are so lazy. Ms. Joker shouldn't have asked you to be her subordinate. Harley Quinn spit out bubble gum towards the roadside. Having said that, she did not refuse the task given to her by Lizu. At the potion distribution area, on the huge stone steps, ordinary people in grey and black clothes lined up in an orderly manner. Click, click, click. The sound of high heels is getting closer and closer. Harley Quinn blew bubbles in her mouth. Pop, the bubble exploded, and the red tongue rubbed against her lips, taking the bubble back into her mouth. She chewed quickly, and winked at the man who was looking at her. Hey sweetheart, buy one get one free. She also gave a sweet smile. The man still had a calm face. The toy man's bastard is right. The clown woman felt a little boring. She dumped her right hand, sleeping the ball, and fishing online. Does anyone want to watch the circus? She shouted loudly. The laughter of ha 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 came from. She was much more exaggerated than I thought. Lizu looked up at the clown woman who was playing the game on the steps. Citizens, get out of the car. A policeman was standing outside the window, pointing a gun at Lizu's head. Oh, right. Lizu nodded in realization, opened the car door and walked out, grabbing the policeman. As soon as he reached out to grab him, a living person, in the blink of an eye, turned into a toy man the size of a finger. Ah, I found it. The key is here. Lizu took the key, started the car and drove away. Only a plastic toy man was thrown out of the car window, and after jumping twice on the ground, it stopped completely. Do you like yo-yos? Harley Quinn was still jumping on the steps, ignoring the bullets and the police chasing her. If you don't like it, then, she asked cheerfully, what about jokes? Do you like to hear them? Industrial area, 3-story employee apartment. Pushing open the Japanese-style room door, the man with a beard waved left and right. The people hiding on both sides immediately dispersed to complete their own tasks. The bearded man walked up to the second floor and stopped in front of a door behind the bathroom. The door was wide open, and the room was filled with contraband. Mona Lisa's smile, sunflowers, the Scream, Starry Night, including the most advanced works of art before the Third World War. There were also CD players, tapes, hard drives, and vinyl records. The stuffed toys were also carefully placed in corrugated boxes and well protected. A group of people were busy moving these contraband. Hurry up, the bearded man urged. Jurgen just received news that someone has diverted the attention of the church. We must quickly take the things and evacuate. The people in the room quickened their pace after hearing this. They quickly packed up these contraband and didn't want any of the things that could be used to express their feelings to be left behind. The sudden sound of the police car made everyone stop like a frightened bird. Prepare to fight back. The bearded man immediately pulled out his pistol, quickly leaned to the window, and quietly looked out. Not the church. He was very surprised. Someone dared to drive the church's car and come here in such a swagger. The person who got off the car really confirmed the bearded man's inner thoughts. The police car stopped, and the person in the car pushed open the door and got out. He was wearing a green suit and holding a toy axe in his left hand, like a complete madman. Hey. Lizu raised his hand and greeted the upstairs window. It's him. The bearded man had a headache. Do you know him? Someone next to him came over and asked. Jurgen called him the antidote. The bearded man nodded and then said he should have gone to divert the attention of the church. Why is he here? Because I'm afraid you will all be killed. Squeak. The window glass was pulled open and Lizu had climbed up without knowing when. It was he who answered the bearded man's words just now. How did you get up here? The bearded man looked at Lizu in shock. In a few seconds. I'm afraid only flying can be so fast. What is this? Lizu's eyes were attracted by the painting erected on the wall, and he didn't pay attention to the bearded man's question at all. These are all works of art, contraband. The bearded man wanted to explain, but found that Lizu had already walked to the sunflower. Lizu fumbled his chin and stared at the sunflower. After 2 minutes, he suddenly asked, who painted this gal portrait? Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Chapter 61. The Strongest Priest. John. Gal. The bearded man followed Lizu's gaze and looked over. It was a famous painting called Starry Night. The entire picture was swallowed by a blue-green torrent, and the curled nebula made the night sky unusually active. This was a crazy work that made the viewer uneasy, and it directly reflected the madness of the author. This is the work of Vincent van Gogh, a great painter of the 19th century. I only saw the starry sky. Another person came over and glanced at Lizu with his peripheral vision. If Lizu didn't have a problem with his eyes, then there was something wrong with his brain. Otherwise he shouldn't have seen a gal in a world famous painting. Yeah, Lizu nodded vigorously, not knowing what he was confirming. After a few seconds, he laughed as if he had guessed something, and then raised his hand to scratch his cheek, as if he was confused. Madman. The people who had sorted out the contraband gathered together, and several of them gave the most appropriate evaluation after seeing Lizu laughing at a painting. The church people will arrive soon. Hurry. Retreat. The bearded man raised his gun. Men, stay and help me resist those bastards. Everyone else, retreat immediately. They separated. The women and children retreated with the contraband, and the people who stayed behind knew that they had no chance of survival. But everyone had no objection to this arrangement, and there was only determination in their eyes. The bearded man turned his head and noticed Lizu, who was still leaning against the wall and laughing. Hey, you should leave here. You have a greater role to play. What about this? Lizu grabbed a painting with his backhand, raised a weird smile on the corner of his mouth and asked, man, woman, or Van Gogh's sunflowers? Sunflowers, the man answered, while snatching the painting, stretched out his hand to pull Lizu's arm, and pulled him out. Sir, now is not the time to laugh. He began to be unable to stand this weird man in green clothes with a smile on his face. From this brief contact, he found that the other party was very similar to the madman in historical records. Sunflowers. Oh. Lizu stared at the painting that was taken away, a simple painting. In his eyes, there were no sunflowers, but another oil painting full of madness. The witch tied to the cross, with pupils as small as pinholes, seemed to look at Lizu through the limitations of paint and paper. Around the witch were people dancing, and some of them only had some human features. Sir? The bearded man suppressed the anger in his heart. If this madman didn't cooperate, he didn't mind using violence to make him cooperate. Where are you going to escape? Lizu asked hurriedly. People looked at Lizu with contempt. Someone actually said that escaping was fair and square. Follow the crowd. The bearded man breathed a sigh of relief. At least this man, who was identified as the antidote by the leader of the rebels, would not die here. Their revolution still had a chance to win. However, is there really any hope? To put the hope of resisting the revolution on a delusional maniac, lunatic, and coward. Police cars led the way in front, and 4 cars escorted a black sedan. There were 2 people sitting in the back seat of the car. Priest Pat G and his partner, John Preston, who is known as the strongest priest. There is a computer in front of the 2 of them, and they are communicating with their superiors. I don't doubt your orders, but there is an emotional criminal causing trouble at the drug distribution point, and more than a dozen police officers have been injured. This incident has a great impact. Even when arguing, John's face did not show any expression. Priest. The man on the other side of the screen said righteously, industrial zone. We have been tracking it for 13 days. There is a huge hiding place for contraband, and there are huge emotional criminals hiding there. I have reason to believe that this riot was planned by emotional criminals for a long time. They just want to move the contraband. The man turned his eyes to Priest Patji. Priest, what do you think? Patji's pupils shrank when he was named, but he hid it well. I will obey your orders completely, sir. Yeah, the man nodded with satisfaction, and he looked at John again. Priest, what about you? Obey orders, John nodded. Don't worry, I have sent the best priest of this period to solve it. The man slowed down his voice and said, he will solve all problems. The screen went out, and the remote call ended. The car turned and headed for the industrial area. In the car, Priest Patji's throat moved slightly. John, what do you think? What is the best way for us to do it? Go and solve the emotional criminals and burn the contraband. John answered without hesitation. Patji looked out the window to ensure that John would not see his pupils shaking violently. Of course, Patji answered as much as possible in a steady voice. The car arrived at the industrial area, and the police cars were arranged in a shield wall. After the hospital battle 13 days ago, the church would no longer be stingy with the number of police officers and strive to perfectly solve all emotional criminals. Bang 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 bang. The gunfight had already started, and black gun muzzles were sticking out of every window upstairs, spewing flames. John grabbed the gun and kicked open the car door. Pat G grabbed John's arm with his right hand to stop him from rushing down. 2 stray bullets shot in through the crack of the car door. Bang, bang, almost hit John's thigh. What's wrong? John looked at Pat G strangely. His eyes had already glanced at Pat G's back. Pat G's left hand, hidden behind his back, was holding a gun. Obviously Pat G's action of hiding the gun did not hide it from him, but because he had no emotions, John did not doubt. Ha 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 ha. A loud laugh came from a distance. This laughter is. Pat G was stunned. Why is he here? But Pat G still let go of his hand and warned, be careful, I will be very uncomfortable with changing partners. Well, John rolled sideways and rushed out of the car. After blowing up the heads of 2 people on the 2nd floor with 2 shots, he rushed into the building with his heels. Pat G sat in the car and looked at the battlefield. John, maybe you can regain your emotions. John rushed into the building, swinging a pair of specially modified priest guns easily. In his hands, the 2 guns were like 2 short knives. Ah! The man carrying the fire axe rushed out and rushed towards John with a roar. John raised his gun and hit the man's wrist, then took a step to the left to avoid the fire axe's downward blow while swinging the pistol sideways. Cap! The man was hit in the throat and fell to the ground with blood foaming at the mouth. Bang! John shot the corpse again. He turned around suddenly, and the 2 guns turned into automatic mode. The series of bullets took the lives of the 3 people who were ambushing in the corner. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62, Gunfighting. Bullets swept across, muzzles turned, and more bodies were on the ground. In John's hands, the 2 guns could not only kill the enemy with bullets, but also swing back and forth like 2 swords. The battle could be close or far, without restrictions. Ah! A man rushed out with a heavy machine gun on his bare chest. His face flushed and he roared. The veins on his neck were noticeable. Heavy firepower weapons are weapons that have been discontinued in the church. They were weapons before the Third World War. The man fired, his body was pushed by the recoil and shook wildly, and his muscles shook out flesh waves. The metal storm swept across, breaking the stairs and smashing the load-bearing columns. John nimbly dodged and hid behind the load-bearing column. Even though the load-bearing column had been shattered by bullets, his expression did not change, as calm as always. Occasionally, 2 stray bullets brushed his face, but they did not alarm John. Ha 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 ha, rush out, you running dogs of the church. The man was still roaring. His left arm had been shaken red by the recoil of the gun. Run, leave this to me. Seeing John hiding and not daring to show his head, the man immediately turned around and shouted at the empty door behind him. He was ready to sacrifice himself to create a chance for his companions to escape. Giloo! John rushed out while the other party was talking, flicked his right hand lightly, and fired. The bullet accurately penetrated the man's jaw and came out from the top of his head with a cluster of blood. The body fell to the ground. No one can escape from here, John stood up and said, gently brushing off the dust on his body. John walked leisurely, and someone must have fallen in a pool of blood when the gunshot was fired. No one in the resistance army left in the whole building could resist John's tricky bullets. The last bullet killed the bearded man hiding in the corner. John could not see regret in the other's eyes, and he could not understand that kind of emotion. Emotional criminals must be shot, once and for all. Cleanup is over. John called the police outside the building. Get ready to come in and clean up. Ha 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 ha. The laughter was very abrupt. Wait. John said, there are still some fish that have slipped through the net. The voice came from behind the building. In the plan of the rebels, the rear of the building is the final evacuation point where the rebels will load contraband and then flee by car. Those who desperately blocked John were all trying to buy time for those who fled by car. These are meaningless, John muttered softly. The church did not blindly pursue the rebels. They implemented the encirclement plan after making all preparations. After the encirclement began, the dragnet was deployed. After that, no one can leave here, not even a fly. 20 heavy firepower policemen had already ambushed near the car in the plan. When everyone got on the car and all the contraband was loaded into the car, what was waiting was not freedom, but a huge explosion. Solving emotional criminals and contraband once and for all is also a part of the plan to save human resources. It was because of the careful action plan that John dared to give that evaluation. Absolutely no one can escape from there. But the direction from which the laughter came made John feel wrong. Why didn't the police just shoot the owner of the laughter, but let the hateful laughter spread throughout the factory? It's impossible that there are still emotional criminals alive. Although John didn't believe it, he still followed the sound and carefully changed the magazine of his pistol on the way. The heavy red painted back door of the building was pushed open. Bang! A bullet was fired, and John didn't dodge because he was sure that the bullet would not hit him. What he saw was a pile of corpses. 20 or so church police fell in a pool of blood like garbage. Their bodies were obviously subjected to inhuman treatment. The car used by the rebels to escape has disappeared. It seems that they have escaped with contraband. The man in a green suit, holding a fire axe in his right hand and aiming a gun at John with his left hand, was looking at him with a big laugh. He was the one who fired the gun just now. John's eyes were fixed on the pistol in the other's hand. That was the gun used by the priest. You killed the priest? John asked coldly. What are you talking about? The other party raised his pistol and waved it. This is the reward I got after exploring this world. After 20%, it will be 2 guns. This group of rebels always have inexplicable adjectives in their mouths, and John has long been accustomed to it. So he picked up the pistol decisively, without aiming. Years of training in gun skills and fighting techniques allowed him to accurately hit the enemy in front of him after his right arm reached 30 degrees, which is much more accurate than shooting with his eyes. Pull the trigger with your finger. Bang. Shoot. Li Zu's eyes were locked on the man in front of him. After he appeared, the degree of world exploration began to surge. 26%, 27%, 28%, 30%, and it didn't stop. Just like Barry Allen, who once appeared in front of Li Zu. The growth is not over yet. 40%. He got to rewards in an instant. Facing a priest, Li Zu, who was confident, seemed to have a good way to deal with it. But he obviously didn't have the experience to understand what he had gained. Bang. John fired. At that moment, Li Zu also fired. He fired passively. After hearing the sound of John firing, he acted completely according to his body's instinct. His momentum and body shape changed in an instant, just like John holding a gun, just like PUBG. He bent his right arm 30 degrees and fired. The bullet would definitely hit the front. The bullet flew out of the muzzle and headed straight for the other party's muzzle. Ding! Exclamation mark. The 2 bullets collided. John was really shocked this time. He stepped back a few steps, shook his right hand, and looked at Li Zu in the distance. Li Zu was still scratching his scalp with the muzzle of the gun in confusion. What is this? Gunfighting? Priest? John stared. This set of fighting skills came from the church. If it wasn't for the core members, it would be impossible to master it. Then Li Zu's identity was obvious. He must have been a member of the priests. John only wanted to take the life of the priest who degenerates and becomes an emotional criminal. He stomped his feet and pounced on Li Zu, quickly closing the distance between the two. The two were only an arm's length away from each other. John pointed his 2 guns at Li Zu's head. Li Zu immediately turned his head and swung his guns back to knock John's guns off his head. Whoosh whoosh. The fire axe chopped down. John dodged sideways and turned the gun to point at Li Zu's head again. Bang. Li Zu fired and the bullet knocked John's gun off his head. John's wrist trembled slightly and the gun turned 45 degrees again and pointed at Li Zu. In their hands, bullets were indisputably accurate. With the heaviness of the fire axe and his acrobatics, Li Zu barely managed to keep himself from being too disadvantaged when confronting John. The two's gun skills and fighting were dazzling. Once again, the gun was pointed at Li Zu's head. John was still better. Lizu was not afraid of being pointed at his head. He smiled strangely and said, "I should go now." A huge shadow enveloped the two, and the figure spread out a pair of huge wings on the left and right. John raised his head, his pupils trembling slightly. It was a woman with wings. Chapter 63, Turning the World Upside Down. Do you believe there are gods in the world? Lizu stared directly into John Preston's eyes, trying to find what he wanted in his eyes. God? John couldn't help but glance up at the sky. It was a woman with wings, and the storm created by flapping her wings hit him head on, pushing him back. Are there people with wings in the world? If it was before the Third World War, there would definitely be a group of people patting their chests frantically, kneeling like old priests, to worship that god. But now, for John, who had no emotions, and had never even touched contraband, it was an incomprehensible creature. You should know. Lizu's eyes were still looking directly into John's eyes through the crosshairs of the pistol. Women with wings, except for the flying show in the circus and the youth TV series at 8 o'clock, can only be found around gods. Are you a god? John asked back, and at the same time, took a step forward, trying to put the muzzle of the gun against Lizu's head. Clang. Lizu threw away the fire axe, and before John's gun was about to touch his head, he quickly reached out and grabbed the muzzle of the gun. I'm not a god. If you know a god, please introduce him to me. I really want to know. Do they like brain teasers or American humor jokes? Bang. John fired without warning. He had no intention of chatting with a weird looking guy, especially when there was a winged woman flying overhead. Poof! Exclamation mark. Lizu's palm was shot through, blood and flesh splattered. The bullet penetrated the wound and went straight to Lizu's head. Boom, the bullet hit Lizu's head, leaving a blood red mark on his forehead and flew out. After passing through Lizu's palm, the bullet had turned into a hollow rubber ball. Apart from hitting Lizu's head and tilting it back, there was no other damage. John felt something was wrong. He lowered his head and found that his pistol had turned into a toy in an instant. He quickly let go of his hand, stepped back, and distanced himself from Lizu. Hiss, it hurts so much. Lizu raised his hand and rubbed his already red forehead. Do you all like sneak attacks so much? I'm not going to waste my chance of rebirth on such a meaningless fight. Got rebirth, meaningless? John felt that Lizu's words were outrageous. If this was not an adjective in language, then the guy in front of him must be a lunatic. Ah, it hurts. Lizu simply dropped the priest gun in his hand, grabbed the palm that was pierced by the bullet, and jumped in pain. Just like a child who suddenly twisted his finger, he completely gave up his vigilance against John. Now nothing was more important than him venting his pain. John still had a gun in his hand, but he didn't have the chance to do it again. The woman flapping her wings above his head was not a decoration. When he fired, she swooped down. When Lizu squatted on the ground and screamed in pain, the woman had already rushed down. Without giving John any chance to resist, she knocked John to the ground with a clean punch. That must be painful. Lizu grabbed his wrist, watched John twist his neck, and flew far away, took a deep breath and said, looking at Lizu's distorted expression, the pain of being pierced by a bullet in the palm must be unbearable. The woman folded her wings and stood in front of him. Although I wish I could kill you right now, but you're lucky, rebel. Hawk Girl looked at Lizu proudly, like an absolute queen. I will take you, who caused this riot, back to the concentration camp, and Queen Diana will give you the final judgment. Bang! A bullet hit Hawk Girl's wings, sparking only a cluster of sparks. Hawk Girl turned her head and looked at John, who was seriously injured in one move and was struggling to get up. Stubborn rebel. Hawk Girl spread her wings, and a gust of wind blew. She was in front of John, and her slender hands easily grabbed his neck and lifted him up. The strongest priest who beat Lizu to the point where he had no power to fight back had no ability to resist at all under Hawk Girl's hands. I said these superheroes are really good at fighting. Lizu seemed to remember the scene when he was beaten by Barry Allen, who had no speed force, and the Batman that he had no confidence in beating now. His body was suspended in the air, his neck was pinched tightly, and he gradually became deprived of oxygen. John's eyes rolled up, and the severe lack of oxygen caused his brain to short circuit. Finally, everything went black before his eyes and he fainted. Hey, Lizu had already walked to the side of the eagle girl and stretched out his hand to pat her wings. You are about to strangle him to death. With a plop, John fell to the ground. Lizu bent down and picked up the eagle girl doll that had grown to the size of a finger. A few drops of blood flowed out of his nose, fell to the ground, and mixed into the pool of blood that was about to dry. He looked at John, who had fallen unconscious. I'm very vengeful. John. The voice came, accompanied by the shaking of the body. John opened his eyes and Patch's face came into view. There were more than a dozen policemen standing next to Reverend Patchy. He was still behind the building, but the bodies around him had been cleaned up, leaving only some faint smell of blood. You are finally awake. Patch's voice sounded very surprised. The dazzling sunlight came from the side and reflected on John's face. John felt that he was looking at this world in a real sense for the first time. The sunlight, the rooftops, everything was so charming. John, what's wrong with you? No, John could still vaguely hear what Lizu said to him when he left. I hold a grudge very well. There is no better way to reward a priest who is responsible for hunting down emotional criminals than to turn him into an emotional criminal. Unfortunately, a group of children and women escaped with contraband, Pat G said, his eyes fixed on John's expression. Fortunately, you have solved enough troubles. Women and children. John subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. He was afraid that his partner would see the problem, so he tried to keep a blank expression and said, they were just lucky this time. It won't happen next time. Late at night, the moonlight went into the sewer and was quickly swallowed up. In the dark room, illuminated only by candles, Lizu sat obediently on a chair, listening to the analysis of the battle situation by the leader of the rebels, Jurgen, and asked Harley Quinn to help him change the medicine. How did you get into this? Where's your Barbie doll? Harley Quinn unwrapped the bandage on Lizu's hand and helped him apply the medicine. Jurgen couldn't stand the weird atmosphere between the two. Fortunately, they only talked about work. Now there is an opportunity to press on. Jurgen said, after our recent investigation, John Preston may have regained his emotions. If we can attract him to join the resistance organization, it will be very helpful to our evolution. What's your plan? Jurgen turned his gaze to Lizu. Lizu looked too calm and seemed to have it all planned out. Of course. He nodded vigorously. In Jurgen's skeptical eyes, Lizu told his crazy plan. We can just turn the whole world upside down. Chapter 64 Partner. Sweetheart, how did you find her? I don't know since when. Harley Quinn Yoyo changed her address to Lizu from Barbie boy to sweetheart. In the eyes of other members of the resistance army, they may be a very suitable pair of crazy lovers. But in Lizu's eyes, Harley Quinn definitely likes his ability to turn everything into toys. For example, Yoyo has been pestering him for a long time about the crazy idea of turning a rocket warhead into a yo-yo. Huh? But it was given to me by God. Lizu spread out his palm, and the Hawk Gerald Toyman was in his hand. This feminist in the Flashpoint world is also an absolute follower of Queen Diana. In theory, it is a big trouble, but in Lizu's hands, at least in this world, her role will be completely different. Didn't you cure that special patient? Where are the things? Lizu put the Hawk Gerald Toyman on the table and asked Harley Quinn. Hey, here. Harley Quinn reached out to her collar and took out 2 bottles of warm yellow potion from there. Lizu frowned as he stared at the 2 bottles of yellow potion. It was obvious that he hated this kind of color. The potion bottles still had the temperature of the body, but the 2 of them ignored this unimportant thing. What are you going to do? Harley Quinn leaned forward, sticking her butt out like a highly myopic biologist, trying to find a hint of strangeness on Hawk Gerald's Toyman. She looked at it intently for a long time, and finally turned her head to look at Lizu's temperature. Take that. Lizu pointed at the pistol on the table. Oh. Harley Quinn took a step to the side, picked up the pistol on the table, pointed it at Lizu's head, and asked very innocently, when are you going to shoot? Lizu turned his head and glanced at the gun in Harley Quinn's hand. It depends on your mood, but it's better not to shoot my head. I still want to experience what it feels like to die slowly. Hehe, that must be very romantic. Harley Quinn laughed crazily. Then can I trouble you to hold the gun firmly and step back? Lizu leaned forward when asking, like an elegant gentleman. Of course. Harley Quinn took a few steps back and distanced herself from Lizu, but the muzzle of the gun was pointed at Lizu's head from beginning to end. In this dark room, only 2 candles were shining. Standing under the light, all the actions of Lizu naturally attracted everyone's attention. Zizi Lizu poured the medicine into the syringe. He aimed with his left hand and gently touched Hawk Gerald's toy man with his right hand. A toy turned into a living person in an instant. The syringe quickly pierced Hawk Gerald's body. After more than 10 seconds, Hawk Gerald seemed to have regained control of her body. She looked at Lizu calmly. "I must take you back to Queen Diana. That black boy lied to me." Harley Quinn grabbed the gun and cursed. "He told me that this thing can wipe out all people's feelings. Why does she still want to go back to Diana?" Her gun was already turned to Hawk Gerald. "Of course she has no emotions." Lizu stared at Hawk Gerald's calm eyes. She is now only absolutely rational and will not be swayed by emotions, but it seems that Queen Diana is the most important in her subconscious. After being deprived of emotions, she will only become a tool who completely obeys orders. "I agree with you taking me to find Queen Diana, but I'm sorry to tell you that we are now in another world, and your Queen Diana is not in this world. How about we talk now?" Lizu pointed out. "You can fly out and take a look first. I really didn't lie to you. What do you want to talk about?" Hawk Gerald has no emotions, impulses, or impatience. "I will take you to find the world where Diana is. Before that, you can bear not to kill me. How about it?" How is his preparation? In the underground resistance organization, Jurgen sat on a wooden chair. Standing in front of the desk was the woman with the same blue eyes. Mary asked doubtfully, "They are ready. Do we really want to do this? This is a last chance. You have seen his ability. As long as we do it according to his plan, and now we have the help of John Preston, this is also our last chance to succeed." Jurgen stood up with the help of the table. He walked out the door. Lizu, who had been waiting for a long time at the door in a green windbreaker, heard the footsteps, turned around and smiled. "Good morning, Jurgen. It's afternoon now." The clown girl beside him blew bubble gum and refuted him. "You can't see the sun here. I miss life under the sun. What about you?" Lizu surrendered to Jurgen with his eyes full of deep meaning. Jurgen and Lizu looked into each other's eyes, and the picture was still for a long time. "I want to go back to the sun too," Jurgen replied with a smile. "Ha ha ha ha." Lizu laughed, and laughed heartily. "It's time to go." Lizu gently patted the Harley Quinn's shoulder, turned her into a toy, and put her in his pocket, and asked, "Where is my partner?" In the afternoon, the sun was about to disappear from the top of the house. John Preston stood in front of the crossroads. His shadow was stretched very long. "Do you have anything else to do?" There was also a church priest standing next to him. A black priest named Brunt, who was also his new partner. "Today's mission is over." Priest John tried his best to suppress the expression on his face. "Of course, I'm just curious about your life." After get off work, Brunt's face was still wearing a fake smile as always, and John was immune to the fake smile on his face. It was a colder expression than a blank expression. "Well, I think you must have your most suitable arrangement." Brunt got in the car with a fake smile and left. John was the only one left at the crossroads. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief. As a high-level combat force under the new government church, his main task is to capture emotional criminals. The so-called criminals are those who do not inject the potion called Boxian, and do not suppress their emotions. Pa. 2 bottles of potion fell from his hands and were crushed by John's shoes. "Why did you waste that stuff?" The voice came abruptly from behind him. His body stiffened, and he subconsciously drew his gun and turned around. The cold and hard muzzle of the gun pressed against John's lower back, blocking his next move. "Priest, we meet again at you." John saw from the corner of his eye that the crazy laughing man who had strong gunfighting skills and physical skills before appeared behind him. "Are you the one who will execute the plan?" John glanced down and saw the other party's bandaged hand. He clearly remembered that the bullet penetrated his palm and turned into something else. "Haven't you experienced my ability?" he asked back. "What is the specific action plan?" John took the lead and walked on the sidewalk. "Let's go to the priest training camp together. As long as I give a passionate speech there, we can get countless emotional criminals. Next, we just need to wait quietly for them to overthrow the church." What do you think? He asked John back. The two walked side by side, chatting. Squeak. The car that just left stopped. The window rolled down, and Reverend Brandt, with a fake smile on his face, watched the two people leave. He turned his eyes downward and saw the broken pieces of the bottle of Persian's potion that was crushed by John. The car started again and Brandt left. Thank you Wang Fei for the 100 starting coins reward. Let me explain. Recently, because of the matters related to going to Japan, plus the urging of marriage from my family, I have a headache, so the update is very unstable. I hope everyone can understand. I'm trying to deal with it. Chapter 65 Reporting myself. A huge white tower stood in front of them, and its top almost pierced through the thick clouds that suddenly gathered overhead. Around the special place, called Priest Training Camp, huge screens as high as 3 stories played a video in a loop, and the priest described the harm brought by emotions expressionlessly. Humans without emotions would not start wars. The world was peaceful, everything was public, and there were no quarrels or criticisms. Before the nuclear war, this was just an imaginary utopia, but now it is real, and the priests are the knights guarding the utopia. The priests who fully understood their missions trained hard with the guidance sounds circulating in their ears. 2 priests in priest costumes stood at the door with special double guns. Some people tried to break through their defenses before, but they are still standing here now. The thick clouds above were suddenly torn apart, and the sunlight passed through the gap and fell on 2 people walking on the path in the distance. Priest. 2 low-level priests greeted John, who happened to be hit by the sun, and looked at the guy standing next to John in a green windbreaker. The corners of his mouth twitched, but the 2 priests could not understand what that meant. I want to go in and see the training situation. Who is he? He is a senior priest assigned by the priest. John interrupted the 2 priests' questions. Please come in. They were very straightforward. Without feelings, there would be no doubt. Lizu and John walked into the gate and headed for the steep steps of the tower. We only have half an hour. John's expression was more solemn than ever before. In half an hour, remove the boxian from them. He turned his head to look at Lizu, but found that Lizu pouted, with a funny expression, as if he wanted to whistle, but could only wish instead of whistling. Priest. The woman in grey priest clothes walked over in small steps. She nodded to John, and then reached out to grab Lizu's arm. John subconsciously wanted to draw his gun. This time he gambled his life, and would never allow the reform to fail. But when he noticed Lizu's demeanor and expression, he let go of his caution. Beautiful lady, do you want to talk to me? You look familiar. Lizu let the other party grab his arm, and rubbed his chin with his injured palm, to look at the other party. His eyes went from eyes to mouth, and finally focused on the other party's chest. I like sexy women. The woman's face was slightly red. She glared at Lizu, but quickly changed her expression, and said to John with a serious face, Priest, we have something to talk about. I will be back soon. Lizu was pulled away by the woman, leaving John watching the backs of the 2 people leaving. She is the police officer who was held hostage at the beginning. John's eyes changed slightly. Anyone who came into contact with Lizu would be affected by his emotions, so the threat of this woman would not exist. Why are you here? Do you know where this place is? Lizu had just been dragged to a remote corner by the female priest. Before he even had time to ask why the other party looked so familiar, she began to question Lizu. This is a priest training camp. There are thousands of priests. Every one of them looks like Priest Patji. Without waiting for Lizu to answer, she began to explain. Seeing that she was worried about Lizu's trespassing into a dangerous place, Lizu didn't care about it at all. Ma'am, I think we have met before. Ahem. He cleared his throat and stood still. You are my ideal type. When I finish this, do you have time to go out and play together? What? Her face was already red. Ferris wheel, or Lego store? Here, this is not the place for you. She stuttered a little. It seems that after a long period of numbness, the sudden gain of emotions made it difficult for her brain to quickly process these complicated emotions. Thank you for your concern. Can you do me a favor? What favor? She asked subconsciously. I was going to wait half an hour. Maybe everything would explode, but that would take too long. So, can you report to the priests that an emotional criminal has sneaked in? Lizu counted his fingers and pointed at his face. It's me. What do you want to do? She found it difficult to understand Li Zu's thinking. In the priest training camp, he exposed himself. As an emotional criminal, he might not even survive. We shouldn't waste too much time on this matter. We should move on to the next step quickly. His expression suddenly became serious, and then he grinned and laughed. Ahem, my partner has been waiting for a long time. Remember to help me with this. Li Zu waved his hand and trotted back to John's side. Only the confused woman was left. As a legend among the priests, the priest who cracked down on the most emotional criminals and destroyed the most contraband. As soon as John appeared, he almost led 70% of the priests to come to watch and learn. But when they arrived at the scene, they found that the priest John was standing on the side, and a man in a green windbreaker was standing in the center. He raised his voice too high and told a joke. I'm going to tell you a joke. He started with this attitude. When he said this, the person in Li Zu's mind was not his crazy self, but the green-haired old boss who liked to make some deadly jokes. Imitating the clown is obviously easier to infect others emotionally than the reserved toy man. He admitted that he was not a madman yet. Although the successive experiences had made him different enough from ordinary people, he should still be a normal person compared to the clown. Everyone was looking at Li Zu, and no one could understand what a joke was yet. Li Zu opened his mouth wide and began to tell his joke. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. He laughed so hard that he cried and bent over with his hands on his stomach. Halo influencer also emanated with a certain mental wave frequency. John stood in the corner, looking at the expressionless priests. The effect of the antidote has not yet been exerted. In another 10 minutes, maybe it can. What a funny joke. The voice came abruptly. John's new partner, Priest Brent, was standing behind Li Zu with a gun against his head. I was notified that an emotional criminal had sneaked into the training camp. I didn't expect him to be so rampant. Hey, Priest Brent's dark face turned to John in the corner. John turned his body sideways. The action had already begun and must not be stopped. But Li Zu changed his previous crazy look and mouthed to John, don't expose yourself. In a few minutes, they will regain their emotions. In a few minutes, they will gain unprecedented military power, but the premise is to sacrifice Li Zu. John clenched his fists and struggled in his heart. I think you will definitely like the incinerator. Brent dragged Li Zu away. The two of them passed all the way. Brent violently pushed Li Zu into the car, sat in the driver's seat and drove away. After leaving the raised gate of the training camp, the atmosphere in the car suddenly changed. Li Zu was not tied up, but was sitting in the passenger seat with a fire axe toy and the priest's pistol, looking very leisurely. Are you Yao Yao's patient? Li Zu asked. It's me. Thanks to Dr. Yao Yao, I have regained my emotions, said Priest Brent with a serious face. He seemed not to like to laugh after regaining his emotions. As early as the last time Yao Yao made trouble at the potion distribution point, she caught a priest and cured him with her crazy brain. It was John's partner, Priest Brent. What should we do next? Priest Brent asked. John and the many priests who have regained their emotions will surely cause a violent commotion, and the resistance war against the utopian world will surely be launched. But Li Zu is not interested in these. Li Zu said, I want to meet the priest. Chapter 66, Reckless. The priest. He was the first person to see through the world's evil, and this utopian world also came into being because of his ideas. It's not easy to see the priest. Brent led the way in front, and Li Zu followed behind him with his hands tied, looking around. Yeah, Li Zu nodded, answering vaguely, but his attention was focused on other places, without any awareness that he was already a prisoner. It was indeed not easy to see the priest. There were 4 priests from the moment you entered the door, and every time you turned a corner, you would encounter a fully armed patrol team. With such strict security, you could feel the suffocating atmosphere here just by walking. Brent, who had emotions, walked on thin ice every step, fearing that the priests would find out that he was an emotional criminal. Even if it was John Preston, he would not be able to survive under such dense guns. Sweat had already slid down Brent's fake smiling face, gathered at his chin, and drooped. On the other hand, Li Zu walked forward with his head held high and chest puffed out in a funny way, even surpassing Brent, and walking forward on his own. Brent saw this and could only speed up his pace to catch up. Afterwards, a few drops of sweat were left on the ground. Lizu walked forward with his head down. There were also two people at the corner in front, but they were wearing white clothes. Swoosh, swoosh, to crisp sounds of swords being drawn, and the sharp blades cut off a strand of black hair on his forehead. Lizu rubbed his nose and retracted his neck. He quickly hid behind Brent. This citizen saw with his own eyes that a person used a special method to solve the effect of Boxian's potion. The priest needs him to explain what he saw in person. Brent explained, his throat moving. He was not as relaxed as he looked. The two priests in white priest robes looked at each other. We need to ask the priest for instructions. One of them turned and left. A minute later, the priest's instructions were not given, but 3 more priests in white robes stood here. Brent stood face to face with the 4 priests, and the double guns in his sleeves were ready to be unsheathed and fired at any time. Just when Brent's psychological pressure was about to reach its peak, the priest who had just left came back. You can go in. Huh. Brent exhaled heavily. In half a minute, he would definitely shoot. Finally, I can meet the great priest. I'm very interested in him. Lizu looked quite excited. It would be more interesting to meet the mastermind who personally built this sick world than to lead a revolution by himself. Lizu just stepped forward, and several knives were unsheathed. The sharp blades of Japanese samurai swords almost gave him a new hairstyle. That guy just said let us in. Lizu acted like an emotional criminal, but it was a pity that these white priests could not tell the difference, and would not doubt it. If you want to see the priest, you must pass the emotional test. The person who explained was Brent, who was already sitting on a table in the distance, with a strange instrument on his wrist. It was an electrocardiogram instrument, and the best way to test emotions is the heartbeat. The white priests formed a human wall and surrounded Brent. As the spiritual core of the entire world, the priest must not be approached by emotional criminals. The significance of screening is very important. Father Brent, please answer my questions. The test has begun. Do you still remember your parents? Yes, Brent replied with a fake smile, his heartbeat steady. Do you remember the first emotional criminal you killed? Please describe the situation at that time. Brent's throat moved. Of course he remembered the first emotional criminal he killed. At that time, he took the other person's life with an expressionless face, but when he regained his emotions, the impact of his sensitive emotions increased by more than 10 times out of thin air. Boom. 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 Brent keenly noticed that his heartbeat was accelerating. The electrocardiogram in front of him had already fluctuated violently out of control. Puff. Boom. Boom. Blood splashed all over Brent's face. A corpse fell on the table, pressing his hand. It was one of the white priests just now. There was a fire axe stuck in the back of the corpse. Hey. Lizu stepped on the corpse, pulled out the fire axe, and held it on his shoulder. Let's go. Go in and see the priest quickly, otherwise it will take too long. Yes. Brand pulled his hand out from under the corpse, and he looked at the corpse lying on the ground in shock. 5 priests, killed in an instant? How did he do it? Brand's keen vision also noticed that the necks or chests of the corpses on the ground had strange rubber materials, and some had no necks, but 2 shiny ribbons. The two walked in quickly, crossed the long corridor, and pushed open the narrow and tall white door. In the huge room, there was a desk by the window. A middle-aged man in a suit sat behind the desk. When he saw Lizu and Brent pushing the door and walking in, he subconsciously glanced at the right side of the desk. There was a priest's pistol, but he just turned his eyes and stood up. Brent, is this gentleman the witness you mentioned? Yes. Brent nodded and looked back. Lizu was looking around, as if he was looking for something. He did find something. A dozen priests were staring at the two of them from the corner. Where's the priest? Lizu was a little disappointed that he didn't find what he wanted. On the big screen outside, in the brainwashing video that was played 24 hours a day, the priest was an old man who looked calm. But here, except for a fat man who looked a little sinister and a dozen fully armed priests, there was no one else. Reverend Brent? The fat man with a sinister expression looked at the black priest. Sir? Brent didn't answer, but looked at Lizu, but found that Lizu had raised the fire axe in his hand, and rushed towards the priest closest to him. The sharp samurai sword collided with the steel fire axe, splashing sparks. Lizu's sneak attack was too fast to be understood. I didn't expect it, priest. The fat man grabbed the pistol on the table, and at the same time, the other dozen priests also rushed towards Brent. Brent was sweating like a spring. No matter who it was impossible for him to survive under such a siege, unless, whoosh, the wind was blowing. Brent grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Above his head, the winged woman suddenly appeared and knocked over a dozen priests with her body strength alone. When Brent's vision was clear again, the woman had already grabbed the vicious fat man's neck and lifted him up. On the other hand, Lizu was squatting on the ground, looking at the samurai sword, then at the fire axe, and decisively threw away the fire axe, picked up the samurai sword, sheathed it and put it on his waist. Hey, spare his life. He waved at the eagle girl flying above his head, but the eagle girl had already taken a step ahead. The body fell to the ground. Chapter 67 Chaos. The blood just flowed out, connecting along the cracks of the floor, like a red spider web covering the entire ground. The corpse was like prey falling on a spider web. Lizu, carrying a samurai sword, stepped over the corpse. He never looked down at the corpses on the ground, but he could always accurately avoid all the blood and avoid getting his shoes wet with blood. Brent followed behind and finished off the dead very carefully. After making sure that no one was alive, he walked to the door to be on guard in case someone came to kill them by surprise. Of course, what was more important for him was to avoid the woman with wings spread out above his head. A dozen senior priests who mastered the art of gunfighting were lying on the ground at this time, turning cold, just because of this woman's attack. Terrible woman. Brent, who had regained his emotions, gave his best judgment in his heart. The eagle girl spread her wings, fanning the air up and down in the air, and her emotionless eyes were always staring at Lizu. Bang! Lizu kicked the door open, and it was a huge computer room. The room was filled with computers, and the brainwashing videos of the priests were playing on the computers. From the labels, we can see which computers here control which walls and which areas. The whole world was slowly constructed. So the priest is here, Lizu suddenly realized. Bang! John fired, and with the sound of the gun, the 2 priests who were about to draw their guns fell down. Priest Preston, the remaining priest, who was a little dazed, drew his gun and walked towards John. Bang! The gunshot rang again, and the priest with a red hole in his forehead fell to the ground. John glanced at the corpse on the ground, turned his head calmly, and waved. A few figures rushed out from behind the corner and ran to his side, and then more and more figures, and finally gathered into a stream, a black mass. The crowd was composed of priests in the training camp. They would be the backbone of maintaining this utopian world in the future. Of course, they have now become emotional criminals, and those priests without emotions have become cold corpses. Priest, what should we do now? The young priest looked at John in admiration. They were all infected by Lizu's laughter. While they felt the beauty of having emotions, they also understood how this priest fooled them. He deprived them of all their emotions, controlled them like a puppet show, and lived like a robot. They needed to liberate the world and let the people in the world regain their freedom. He is very important, but he was taken away by Brent. John didn't know Lizu's name. To him, he was a very magical and weird guy. His special abilities were very useful in the current world. While John was talking, 2 priests in the distance noticed something was wrong and came over. Priest, are you ready to? Bang! The priest who asked from a distance was always suppressed in his throat. The one who fired the gun was the young priest standing next to John. Priest. The young priest stepped on the corpse and looked at John firmly. We can help too. Yes, we can help. A response like thunder came from behind. We'll need you for the next thing. The resistance needs your help. John put away his gun. He didn't need a burden. It was difficult to rescue Lizu. It was not suitable for a large number of people to rescue him. John was really afraid that he would laugh out loud and be shot by a priest passing by on the street. Ha 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 ha. The laughter really came, and it was the same as John's memory. It was Lizu. John raised his head and saw that the influence of the priest had disappeared on the huge wall display screen and was replaced by Lizu's smiling face. The laughter spread quickly and soon covered the city and spread out radially, affecting farther and farther. This lunatic. Listening to the crazy laughter, John also laughed uncontrollably and laughed harder and harder. More and more people walking on the street were affected. More and more people woke up from the influence of the Boxian potion, and the whole world fell into a carnival and laughter. However, when the old face suddenly appeared, everyone's smiles stopped abruptly. It was the priest. He promoted Boxian, making it impossible for people to experience emotions. Emotions are wonderful, and none of us should let them disappear, the priest said. I'm deeply sorry for my previous behavior. The priest was describing his own experience. I was under house arrest, and people with ulterior motives used my hands to build this new post-war world. Perhaps the world really needs freedom, and the next world should be controlled by each of you. Excited speech, generous decentralization. Before the revolution of the rebels started, the priest actually jumped out and ended it all himself. John felt something was wrong, but he couldn't deny that the priest's speech was too deeply rooted in people's hearts. Even if it was only a short 1 or 2 sentences, he couldn't help but sympathize with the imprisoned priest and thank him for standing up now. At least no more people will die because of this. John's hand holding the gun loosened slightly, and he was finally relieved. In the new world, surrounded by huge walls, people walking on the street obeyed the priest's latest order, no longer injected Boxian, and quietly waited for the drug to end. Their eyes lit up again, to feel this world, to distinguish the differences between each other. The whole world was in a carnival. The first day, the second day, the third day, 5 days in a row. In the sunshine, Jurgen walked on the street, and Mary followed him. The children holding balloons squeezed past them, and ran away laughing. Life in the sun is so good. Mary stretched out her hand, and felt the sunshine on her palm. Without too much sacrifice, the whole world regained emotions. This victory was really simple, so simple that it was unreal. Here's our antidote, Mary said as she looked at the people who were still reveling on the street. He appeared to save the world, but he disappeared now, just like he suddenly appeared at that time. Lizu appeared, like a laughing antidote, to save this emotionless world, and now he disappeared again. If we are destined, we will see each other again. Jurgen did not seem as optimistic as Mary. As the leader of the resistance army, he could see more. This carnival lasted for a long time, and might last forever. Even though the priest's action of suppressing human emotions with potions seemed extremely stupid, there was at least one thing that was right. Various human emotions will always lead to wars and social conflicts. This is mine. Get out of here. Ah. He's bleeding. A sudden noise came from the distance, and the revelry was forced to stop. 2 people were fighting each other, and there was a group of people who were at a loss. Jurgen and Mary looked at each other, and rushed over immediately. In the high-rise building that belonged to the priest, squeak, squeak, squeak. Standing in front of the huge French window, Lizu looked down and saw that the revelry that had lasted for several days was finally broken. Squeak. Lizu couldn't stand the noise. He picked his ears with his little finger and turned around, looking at the Harley Quinn who was swinging the yo-yo, trying to stop her with his eyes. Are you imitating her? Yo-yo blew bubble gum. A little bit. Lizu pinched his little finger and gestured a little bit. He walked backwards to the desk, jumped up suddenly, and threw himself on the office chair. The world is essentially chaotic, but humans need to establish order. Harley Quinn didn't care about his mumbling at all. She just looked at him, watching the bubbles getting bigger and bigger, and finally bang exploded. Ha 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 ha. It seemed she was more interested in blowing bubbles. Chapter 68 New Priest. This place sucks. I miss Gotham. Harley Quinn chewed bubble gum quickly, pouting her lips, and blowing pink bubbles again. We should leave in a few days. Lizu looked at the world exploration degree, which was stuck at 49%, and could not go any further. The time-space gate was about to open again. What kind of bastard world would it be next time? Or what interesting experience would it be? He was just a little confused about those somewhat chaotic dreams. As he kept increasing the degree of world exploration, his dreams became more and more weird, like weird blood-sucking monsters like worms, old women with haggard faces, and giant octopus tentacles hidden under the deep sea. Lizu also found that he was sometimes like the Joker, For no reason, just for the sake of a simple chaotic madman. He was very worried that one day, he would blow his head with a gun. Even if he had 2 lives, it would definitely hurt. It will always be figured out, it will always be figured out. He tried to comfort himself and calm his uncontrollable heartbeat. That eagle, she's so cold. Harley Quinn blew bubbles and said, she followed Diana? I heard that Diana was a female king, and women in her place had good welfare. Really? But she herself has a bad temper, Lizu recalled. Father, it's ready. Priest Brent pushed the door and came in, interrupting the 2 people's chat. He bowed to Lizu, but looked at Harley Quinn with admiration, gratitude, and even some infatuation. Lizu had doubted more than once, how bad must one's taste be, to be attracted to a lunatic like Harley Quinn? Then play new content and gain freedom, isn't that what they want? He ordered. At 12:23 noon, 8 days had passed, since people regained their emotions. In 8 days, everything changed again. The church completely disappeared, and the priests who regained their emotions were unwilling to serve the church. The world was in a state of no government. Everyone is their own master, which means they can do everything they want without caring about other people's rules and laws. This is absolute freedom. Thus, flames, curses, fists, blood, and broken teeth flying everywhere formed the celebration banquet after the carnival. People were immersed in the joy of emotions and violence. After all, only a few people were wailing, and most of them were enjoying it. Among the few people, the resistance army, that had long gained emotions, and gathered together was also the most anxious to see this incident. They had been silent for a long time, and finally couldn't wait any longer, after seeing the world getting worse and worse. Jurgen rushed out with a gun, and John Preston followed closely behind him. This action should not allow too many people to participate. A bearded man with a knife and a face full of flesh rushed over. John raised his pistol, but he caught a glimpse of Jurgen shaking his head slightly. The action of shooting was forcibly cancelled, and John used the handle of the gun to knock the bearded man unconscious. Relying only on fighting ability, John could easily break out of the siege. When the unconscious people piled up into a small mountain in front of him, John was just panting slightly, but Jurgen, who had been dodging from beginning to end, was panting and sweating. The priest must know what happened, Jurgen said, wiping his sweat and holding his knees. He had heard many rumors about John, but he never thought he was so terrible. He is the last trouble. John also agreed with Jurgen's words. The old system was abolished by the priest himself, which was just a self-protection move by the priest. Maybe he was secretly controlling all this. Now they have to find the priest to end it all. Chaotic streets, crazy men, screaming women, and old people kneeling to pray. I dedicate my heart to you, and ask you to deprive me of my feelings again, and give me peace. The skinny old man with a naked upper body raised his hands high towards the tower, where the priest was. It's a pity that all the Boxian pharmaceutical factory was spontaneously destroyed by people who regained their feelings. There is no Boxian in this world anymore. No one's feelings will be deprived again. John watched this scene helplessly. Feelings are something that makes people intoxicated, so why do they look more desperate than when they have no feelings? Along the way, all kinds of people have aggravated John's self-doubt. Jurgen was keenly aware of John's abnormality. He raised his voice to make John come back to his senses. We are here. They arrived at the residence of the priest after his retirement. There was no heavy guard, the building was empty, and the hall was covered with dust. John followed his memory and took Jurgen upstairs step by step. There was indeed no ambush here. Instead, it looked like an abandoned building ready for demolition, dead and lifeless. Walking out of the stairwell and turning right, John's face changed slightly, and he raised his pistol. Opposite him, outside the priest's door, the former priest Brent, dressed in black, and with a fake smile, was smiling at him, looking as if he had been waiting for a long time. Partner, see you again. Brent greeted enthusiastically. You took him away. John began to feel something was wrong. When Lizu was taken away by Brand in the training camp, there were only two possible outcomes. One was that Lizu was killed by the fake smiling Brand, and the other was that Lizu killed Brand. When Lizu appeared on the wall monitor, John thought Brand had been killed, but it didn't look like that now. Everything you want to know is inside. Please. Brandt pushed open the door and bent down to invite the two. John. Jurgen was a little worried. John just nodded and strode towards the door behind Brandt, which was slightly open. The heavy door was pushed open, and the person sitting on the desk behind the door was not the priest, but Lizu. Lizu seemed to have not expected John and Jurgen to find this place, and his expression was a little surprised. Silence. Are you the priest? John asked. Combining all the experiences before and after, it seemed like Lizu directed and acted by himself. Apart from this, John and Jurgen could not find a second reason. Of course not. Lizu stood up with the help of the table, his green windbreaker lifted up and pressed on the desk. The priest you want is in there. He pointed his finger back. John was still confronting Lizu. John knew that, although Lizu's gunfighting skills were not as good as his physical flexibility was far superior to his. He had to keep an eye on him at all times to prevent Lizu from turning into a grasshopper and disappearing from his sight. If they fought, he would not have the upper hand, and the woman with eagle wings was not simple. Jurgen followed the direction indicated by Lizu and trotted over. After pushing open the door, Jurgen froze. Jurgen. John was a little worried. The door opened, and the priest appeared in front of John. It was a computer, showing its high performance, using real-time calculations to write passionate lies to inspire the world. The current priest is saying new content, asking people to give up order and choose emotion and freedom. This is also the reason for the chaos. Human nature is good. Without deception, people will never turn their swords against their companions. John and Jurgen think so. Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you NC for the 100 starting coins reward. Thank you for the 1000 starting coins reward. Thank you 201909242343284447 for the 100 starting coins reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69 The Rocking Boat. I just gave the computers the opposite order, so that people can regain their emotions. Lizu shrugged, and he didn't seem to want to take credit at all. Besides, hasn't this world been returned to you? What's happening now has nothing to do with me. You have to rely on yourself. Lizu's decisions are incomprehensible. When problems arise, he will suddenly stand up. Sometimes, like now, he looks like a coward who is afraid of trouble and is eager to get himself out. Jurgen has raised his gun and shot and destroyed all the computers in the room. Humans don't need priests to guide them, not to mention that priests are just computers. People can have their own brains and think about their own future. Is all this right? John heard the gunshots, but he didn't really breathe a sigh of relief. His brain told himself that the emergence of wars and revolutions was not because people needed to regain their emotions, and computers disguised as priests looked more like a fantasy. The emergence of war is inevitable, and John subconsciously believes that Lizu knows the answer. People are now worse than after being injected with porcelain. They are selfish, robbing, violent, and bloody. John questioned Lizu. What did you do, right? Isn't this freedom? Lizu held the table with a strange expression. He seemed to not understand John's question. Everyone has their own human rights and freedoms. They can do whatever they want. Aren't you rebelling against the priest and porcelain for these? You are the antidote, but you make everything worse. John insisted that it was Lizu's appearance. Antidote? No, I'm not the savior. Lizu fell back into his chair, raised his right index finger, pressed it against his lips, and urged, it's the expert. The expert who returns everything to freedom and chaos. You. Jurgen had rushed back and raised the gun in his hand, but he was stopped by John. Lizu regarded all this as a game. Whether it was porcelain controlling human emotions or humans fighting against the revolution to the death for emotions, in his eyes it was just an interesting game. John pressed Jurgen's shoulder and shook his head gently. Let me do it. Be careful. Jurgen's eyes shifted to the toy figurine on the table. If the woman with eagle wings wakes up, even John Preston may not be able to escape unscathed. Knowing that he could not help here, Jurgen repeatedly warned and turned away. When leaving, Jurgen looked at Lizu with a complicated look. Lizu may not be the savior, but he really completed the task of the savior in all aspects. Bang, the door closed, and only Lizu and John were left in the room. Lizu lay on his back in the chair, looking at John in a relaxed manner. "What should we do in this world?" John asked. "Ask a madman. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha." Lizu laughed in a weird tone. "If a circus performer wants to tame a lion, he must make sure he stands outside the cage and holds a whip in his hand. Of course, he must let the lion see you throw the cage key away, where it can't get it anyway." Lizu's laughter became more rational. "Maybe you can also choose to lock yourself in the cage and become one of them. This is a meaningful advice. Only by standing outside of society can you control the entire society. People who are deeply trapped in it can never save the world and will only be swallowed up." Perhaps compared to the meaning behind this metaphor, Lizu is more concerned about whether the lion will recognize the cage key. "Have you asked the question?" Click. Sensing danger, almost as a reflex, the priest's pistol slipped into John's hand. At that time, Lizu had already reached out and grabbed the pistol on the corner of the table. Across a table, the two pointed their guns at each other's heads. This shouldn't be the last way for a partner to say goodbye. John ignored Lizu's words and stared at Lizu. "You smell like horror. I caught a cold recently, otherwise I really want to smell what horror smells like." Lizu looked a little regretful and sniffed hard, as if he really wanted to smell the smell of horror. But in the end, he only showed regret on his face. Lizu's right hand was still pointing the gun at John, but his left hand was raised in front of his face. He stared at the exposed part of his left wrist, nodded seriously and said, "Time is almost up." He didn't care at all that John's gun was about to be against his head, but John believed that, if he chose to shoot, Lizu's bullet would definitely not fall behind. "When is the time?" John had already expected Lizu's crazy words, but seeing Lizu's eyes staring at his wrist, he still spoke. "Go to a place that may be more interesting. There are still too many places in this world that have not been explored." But Lizu took a deep breath and said, like praying, "I really hope there are not too many fish in that place." Bang. Lizu fired without warning, but fortunately John reacted quickly and dodged subconsciously. After turning his head sideways, John relied on his body's instinctive gunfighting technique to swing his elbow to the right, bend it 28 degrees, and fired. This shot hit Lizu's forehead. The accuracy of the bullet does not come from aiming, but from the perfect formula of gunfighting technique and the muscle memory of the body. Crash. The huge French window was shattered by the bullet, and the place where Lizu was supposed to stand was empty. Not only that, the Eagle Girl toy on the table also disappeared. Lizu just disappeared from this world out of thin air, as if he had never appeared. Outside the priest's office, John walked out and saw Jurgen, who was knocked to the ground, and his former partner Brandt, who was pointing a gun at Jurgen. Something unfriendly must have happened between the two of them just now. "The priest has something for me to give you." John Brandt took out a portable computer from his arms, and the computer screen lit up, showing the priest's face. As John's expression changed, the priest on the screen also had the same expression change. Data scanning and loading, synchronization 100%. The shaking bed, perhaps the ground and ceiling are shaking together. The fishy and salty wind blew in through the open window and hit Lizu's face. The damp breath was very strong and woke him up. Yawn. Lizu sat up and stretched. Crash. It was the sound of waves. The door of the room was wide open, and a man holding a huge bottle of wine walked past the door along the wall. He looked drunk and seemed to have drunk a lot of wine. The drunk looked at Lizu, muttered a few words that no one could understand, and then left. This is a narrow room with no decoration. In addition to the bed where Lizu was lying at this time, there was a stack of newspapers on the table in the distance, and a model of a ship. What a terrible place. Lizu got up, grabbed the black western-style windbreaker that was obviously from the early 20th century on the bedside, put on his bowler hat, and there was a skull-shaped cane beside the bed, which might also belong to him. He walked out the door, looked at the dark sea from the side of the ship, and complained, "What a terrible sea." Thank you intestine forging man for the 500 starting coins reward. Chapter 70 Detective Reed. The Endless Sea. The dark sea seemed to hide some strange huge monster. It was looking directly at Lizu's eyes through the sea. Lizu also tried to look back at the sea with his eyes, but unfortunately, all he got was darkness. There is still one day left. Are you also invited? Lizu turned around and saw a man wearing the same gentleman's windbreaker. His skin was pale, his eyes were full of bloodshot, and his spirit was a little decadent. There was also a scar on his face. Invitation? Lizu scratched his cheek, his eyeballs rolling randomly in his eye sockets. Maybe? I'm Reed. I used to be a sailor, and now I'm a detective. I have some special diseases. I heard that there are many patients with the same diseases as me in this town, so I came to see the two men who looked a little decadent shook hands. What about you? Reed asked when he saw that Lizu was hesitant to answer. Maybe it was the detective's instinct that made him feel that Lizu was not ordinary. Bruce Wayne, I'm also a detective, and I don't know how I got on this ship either. He changed the subject and imitated Reed. He didn't care about the other's illness or where he was going. Lizu was still somewhat easygoing. When the time-space gate opened, he would leave one world and head for a new unknown world. Exploring the world seemed to be the only comfort for his journey. Fortunately, he really had a strong interest in the unknown, which made this forced journey not so boring. Suddenly, a pair of big hands pressed on Lizu and Reed's shoulders, one on the left and one on the right, and violently pushed them away. You two. Go back to your rooms. Don't wander around on the ship. The voice was very rude. The white sailor with Viking descent had red cheeks and stared at the two with bull eyes. Mr. Wayne, I hope we can find a tavern to drink after arriving at the port. Reed nodded gently to Lizu and then left quickly. He lived one room away from Lizu. Lizu also returned to his room and closed the door to block the uncomfortable sea breeze. Squeak. He pulled the rough stool made by Chen Mu, and the legs of the stool made a sharp sound when rubbing against the damp wooden floor. Lizu sat at the table, supporting his face with his elbow. In the last world, he did not gain much, with only 49% exploration degree, which further proved that he did not really understand that world. Fortunately, he was not a person who lingered in the past. Space-time gate, cooling, 8760H, world exploration degree. 0.1%. The time he stayed in this world was much longer than expected. Moreover, he only got such a rare exploration degree for the first time, and the only 0.1% came from Reed, who took the initiative to talk to him just now. Lizu lowered his head and looked at the model ship on the table. The black ship was nothing special. In addition to the name Charon making people feel a little uncomfortable, the last time this name appeared in front of Lizu was the name of the Styx ferryman in the Greek mythology, which was contraband. However, for Lizu, a toy collector, low-grade handmade toys made of damp mossy wood have no collection value. The newspaper at hand is very interesting. 1920. The damp printed text still has a strong smell of ink, and it is obvious that the newspaper is still fresh. The British police have arrested the townspeople of Innsmouth. This is a follow-up record of a British reporter. The newspaper was published and distributed in the United States, but it published the manuscript of the British reporter. They have ugly faces like fish people. Lizu stared at the black and white photo carefully. Unfortunately, the thumb-sized black and white photo could not satisfy Lizu's curiosity to see the fish people. He flipped through the newspaper again and finally stood up with the help of the table in boredom, pacing back and forth in the narrow room. The sea breeze outside the ship never stopped. After searching his luggage and confirming that there was no food, Lizu lay on the bed and fell asleep. Bang! It was the violent shaking of the hull that woke him up. The boat seemed to have hit a reef. It was shaking violently, and seawater splashed in through the window gaps, splashing Lizu's face. The wall was shaking a little. Lizu stood up dizzily, pushed open the door and walked out. Dong 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 dong. Looking at the scene outside, Lizu's heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. The boat had hit a reef. Not only that, but the entire ship was parked on a dark reef. The sea disappeared. Splash! There was a sound of water above his head. Lizu raised his head and saw a 30-foot long octopus tentacle. 4 or 5 huge octopus tentacles were hanging above his head, covering the sky and the sun. Beyond the octopus tentacles, there was a piece of water. It was the sea. The sea did not disappear, but appeared above his head, replacing the sky. The huge marine creature with octopus tentacles moved strangely in the sea water above his head, and the sound it emitted was even more vague and continuous. Not only was it difficult to understand, but even imitating it as usual could not make that kind of weird sound. Ha. Lizu opened his eyes suddenly. Everything just now was just a dream. Bang, the boat shook violently and stopped. Lizu stood up from the bed, opened the door and walked out. You slept for a long time. Reed had already stood there at the side of the ship. He was even more depressed. Perhaps he had experienced the same weird dream as Lizu. Otherwise, the two of them should not be equally depressed. We are here. This time it was not a dream. The seawater did not appear in the sky. Lizu got off the boat. He did not even take the cane and suitcase. Just standing at the side of the ship and looking at the town through the harbor, Lizu's heart began to beat non-stop. This place exudes a familiar smell. It is a morbid smell beyond Gotham City, beyond the danger of Blackgate Prison. Only Arkham Asylum can have a smell. Lizu walked to the port. Before that, Reed boarded the port before him. He was now talking to a thin man in a yellow suit and a yellow top hat. Mr. Wayne. Goodbye. Reed said hello very friendly. Lizu was stunned, then he smiled and nodded. Goodbye. I'm Johans. When Lizu was about to leave, the man in yellow standing opposite Reed stopped Lizu and introduced himself very gentlemanly. Local. This town has a lot of troubles for some reasons. Now is not a good time to travel. I can recommend you to stay for a few days until everything here is over. Evil Spirit Reef. You will definitely be able to rest well there. Lizu stared at the man in yellow for a long time and responded with the simplest action, nodding. He rarely had such an expression, even when facing a superhero who could easily kill him. He looked indifferent, but the smell of the man in front of him forced him to stay rational. On the huge rusty sign facing the port, in addition to being hung with fish bones, there were also words written in white paint. Welcome to the town of Oakman. Thank you Hans Hang Menting Shang for the reward of 500 starting coins. And thank you Liu Xiaoxiang for the reward of 1000 starting coins. Chapter 71 Weirdos. Welcome to Oakman Town. A huge welcome sign caught his eye. If there weren't a few people standing in the distance, staring at the ships docked at the port, and glaring at Lizu, maybe someone would be willing to believe that they were friendly and welcoming outsiders. Reed was still chatting with the man in yellow clothes, and they seemed to be talking for a long time. The ship's planks built a path from the seaside to the land. Lizu took a deep breath and relaxed his tense nerves. He stepped into his expensive looking patent leather boots and walked along the path. The whole world was filled with a strange atmosphere, whether it was on the ship, the port, or the inexplicable dream. A person in front was kneeling on the path, muttering to himself towards the sea. The end of the world is coming. Lizu lowered his head and could barely hear what the other person said. A new reincarnation is about to begin. Something from the ground is about to appear. The seeds have been sown. At the end, the strange man raised his hands high and spoke, as if he wanted to embrace the ocean. Lizu shrugged and turned away. He had no interest in madmen. At the fork in the road, there was a group of guards in front. They seemed to be waiting for Lizu to pass by. Their half-open lips seemed to be filled with vicious instructions, just waiting for Lizu to walk in front of them and then spit him in the face. Lizu turned in a direction very tactfully. It was a small road that did not seem to lead to the hinterland of the town, let alone the hotel recommended by the man in yellow. At the end of the small road was the sea. A lifeboat named Titania was stranded on the shore. There were two residents of Oakmont next to the lifeboat. They were whispering to each other. After noticing Lizu coming over, the expressions of the two people became a little weirder, a little resistant and disgusted. Of course, there was nothing worth Lizu's curiosity about a lifeboat, but when he stared at the lifeboat, his brain ached, and hallucinations appeared in front of his eyes. A terrifying monster, thick octopus tentacles, and the deep sea that was dark and cold to the bone marrow. The world's exploration also increased a little with difficulty 0.2%. The severe pain and hallucinations came suddenly and disappeared quickly. When the hallucinations disappeared, Lizu had fallen to the ground unconsciously, curled up. Stranger. Stranger. Hey. Are you okay? The two local townspeople were not too indifferent. They squatted in front of Lizu and patted his cheeks gently. Hoo. 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 Lizu took a deep breath, trying to control the beating speed of his heart and the hallucinations that affected his judgment. It took him 2 minutes to successfully stabilize his breath. Rather than saying that he controlled the hallucinations and heartbeats himself, it is better to say that his heart calmed down consciously and the hallucinations faded away quietly. It's really disobedient. Lizu touched his heart. It would be more convenient to replace this rebellious guy with a new heart. Where did this lifeboat called Titania come from? Lizu asked about the news of the lifeboat as soon as he sat up. The Titania is a local fishing boat, usually moored at the N3 pier, but the tide rose some time ago, and many sections of the road were covered by the sea. If you want to go there, you need a boat, said the person on the left, as if he was waiting for Lizu to ask questions. So when Lizu asked the first question, the person couldn't wait to tell him everything. Those damn Innsmouth people, since they came here, not only has the whole town become weird, we can't even catch fish. Another person cursed, and from what he said, the so-called Innsmouth people seem to be the culprit of all this. Seeing Lizu standing up with his knees shaking and preparing to leave, the town residents reminded him again, "Stranger, you'd better find a place to hide, don't walk around." Of course, Lizu lowered his head and walked towards the main road of Oakmont Town. After walking out of the small path and onto the main road, he came to the fierce guards. The iron rods on their waists seemed to indicate their unique right to torture privately. When he came to the group of people, a man with an orangutan face and wearing a white gentleman's suit walked out of the crowd. "Stranger." He stopped Lizu and said, "You are unlucky. You can't leave here before the blockade is lifted. No one can leave here. Mr. Slogmorton, he came with me." Reed had just finished talking with the man in yellow and trotted over to help Lizu out. Although Lizu had not suffered any unfair treatment. "Who are you?" The orangutan-faced man looked at Reed. "Charles Reed, a detective. I heard that you are studying the disease of hallucinations in the brain. I came to the town for this matter. I won't help anyone now. My son is missing. I'm now determined to find him. Unless you can help me find where he is." The orangutan-faced man looked arrogant and looked like an aristocrat in the early 20th century. "Pa." Lizu slapped his forehead. "If I were playing games, I would definitely hear a ding sound now. It is 1920 now. No one understands playing games, and a few people just look at him strangely. They seem to be used to hearing crazy talk, so they didn't ask Lizu anymore. Bruce and I are both detectives. Maybe we can help you find your son." We changed the subject quickly, and he seemed to realize how powerful this guy with a gorilla face is in the local area. This area with poor information and underdeveloped transportation still maintains the old system to rule everything. Mr. Slogmorton with a gorilla face looked at Lizu, and then at Reed. Two pale guys with heavy dark bags under their eyes and mental depression. "You detectives are really easy to recognize." After hearing their profession, Slogmorton also chose to speak up. "My son Albert traveled with the Titania before. A fisherman found him and said that he rushed back in a lifeboat. The lifeboat is nearby if you can find more clues on it. When I received the news and rushed over, my son had disappeared. They said Albert went crazy, which is impossible. Albert has always been gentle and polite." After listening to the brief introduction, Reed turned around and found that Lizu lowered his head as if thinking, "Bruce, have you found anything?" He didn't have any clues at all, but Lizu seemed to have already started investigating the case. "Does your son look like this too?" Lizu raised his head and pulled his cheeks to make himself look like a gorilla. "This is a complete mockery. Boy, ape blood is the glory of the family." The gorilla face roared. "Really?" Lizu scratched his cheek, ignoring the iron rods that the guards had already pulled out. Reed, who was standing next to Lizu, was sweating profusely. He thought Lizu was thinking about the case, but he didn't expect that Lizu only noticed his strange appearance. "Let's go investigate the case, Mr. Slogmorton. I hope you can tell me about the relevant things when we come back." Reed dragged Lizu away, lest he didn't die in the hallucination, but was beaten to death by the local squires and nobles. Leaving the port, walking into the edge of Oakmont Town, There are many residents, but not many pedestrians on the road. You'd better find a place to hide. Mr. Johns' suggestion is not bad. Reed was afraid that Lizu would continue to cause trouble. Offending the local nobles would be life-threatening. Although the two met by chance, he didn't know why Lizu came to this place, but Reed still had a great sense of intimacy with Lizu, who was on the same ship in the same city. Well, let's separate here. Lizu was very straightforward. He put one hand in his pocket and walked towards the town with his eyes looking around. His nose twitched from time to time. What a weird guy, Reed said as he watched Lizu leave. He turned his head and said, "It's time to investigate the case." Chapter 72 Underground Monster. Lizu's nose twitched slightly, like a dog searching for something with a special smell. He walked the whole way from the beginning to the end of the street. His actions were very strange, and he had a strange smile on his face. After only half a day in Oakmont, Lizu had already successfully put on the label of weird guy, making everyone avoid him. As if he was a little bored, he stopped sniffing and exploring with his nose, and sat down on the side of the road to rest. He sat cross-legged on the side of the road, his elbows on his knees, supporting his side face, and observing the passers-by boredly. Every passerby would be stared at by him for a long time. "He is chasing Albert." "Why?" A somewhat urgent voice came. It was Charles Reed, who had parted ways not long ago. "This is it. What happened here? What was taken away?" Reed wandered in front of Lizu, trying to find something. He did not notice Lizu sitting on the side of the road. There were too many people with strange actions in this town, and it was difficult for people sitting on the side of the road to arouse his attention. "Are you looking for this?" A bullet shell was thrown high into the sky, reflecting the dazzling sunlight. Snap! The shell was caught in the palm of his hand. Bruce Wayne? Reed was surprised to find that the most important clue actually appeared in the hands of the detective who was traveling with him. "I have that ability to find clues so quickly. How did he do it? And so much faster than me." Reed looked at Lizu with a different look. Curiosity, admiration, vigilance. There were too many things in his lifeless eyes. Lizu had already thrown the bullet shell over. Reed caught the shell, and he forced himself to suppress the strangeness and suspicion in his heart, lowered his head, and locked his eyes on the bullet. At that moment, everything in front of him changed. As a detective, Reed has always had a very magical ability. As long as there are enough clues and items at the scene, he can use his own eyes to see everything that happened at the time in the most intuitive way. It's like crossing time and space, returning to the time of the crime, and watching everything happen again with his own eyes. Reed couldn't figure out how much this ability was related to the hallucinations that kept tormenting him, but this ability really helped him solve a lot of problems, and even made him quite famous in the detective world. In addition to the invitation from the locals, his detective ability also played a big role in his coming to Oakmont this time. When he activated his ability, he successfully saw the content that he had disconnected from the pursuit. Albert, the staggering man, was chased by a crazy man with a gun. He shot. Reed opened his eyes, looked at Lizu, and said with certainty, "The bullet hit Albert." The pursuer was ready to kill Albert from the beginning. But all this doesn't make sense. Why was Albert the one who went crazy at the beginning, and then Lewis had to chase Albert? Can Albert really make people crazy? Lizu scratched his head in confusion. Reed's words just now were mixed with too many characters. It seemed that he was more concerned about a new problem. "Your eyes just turned blue and glowed. This is just an insignificant ability. We should go this way." Reed pointed to the front. He had no intention of discussing his damn ability in detail, but his actions naturally included Lizu in the group. Lizu took a step and followed Reed. On the road, Reed and Lizu were walking side by side, and Reed whispered, "This town is very strange. Have you noticed? They all have beliefs, fanatical believers in a certain god, or some gods." As he spoke, Reed raised his finger and pointed at the man who was kneeling towards the sea on the side of the road. "He is not the first." Lizu nodded seriously and asked, "Well, so what are you going to do next?" Of course I'm going to find Albert. Only by finding Albert can I solve the illusion in my brain, and you can leave this damn place." Reed looked at Lizu and found that he was really confused and couldn't help swearing, "Damn it, man. Don't tell me you didn't plan to find Albert at all. Who is Albert? Lizu seemed to be in a strange state, just scratching his cheek constantly, making his cheek red. Do you have amnesia? Albert, Robert Throgmorton's son. Seeing that Lizu was still puzzled, he had to add, it's the son of the white ape. He's missing. If we want to move freely in this town, we'd better solve this matter first. Outsiders are not welcome here. Reed thought that he was already a decadent and neurotic weird guy, but compared with the person in front of him, he was still far behind. Reed once again suspected that Lizu was really weird or deliberately pretending. After all, Lizu just found the shell and deliberately waited for his actions. In addition to proving that Lizu was also investigating this case, there was no other explanation. A weird detective. After giving a strange evaluation, Reed also recognized Lizu's ability to investigate the case in disguise. Here we are, right here. They stopped in a factory that exuded a strong fishy smell. Even if the door was closed tightly, the smell was still very strong. Hey, what are you doing? Reed found that Lizu had opened the door and walked in first. Wait for me. Don't touch the clues inside. Reed trotted in. The messy warehouse exuded a strange smell. There was a strange big hole on the floor of the living room, as if ready to swallow everything. There is a basement here. It should be in the basement. Reed took a step forward, his eyes emitting blue light, guiding him forward. Lizu stopped and stood at the door. The prop box fell from the sky and hit his feet. He took a deep breath. This smell, as long as you have been to that crazy place once, you will never forget the smell in the air. The crazy atmosphere of Arkham Asylum. Lizu took out the priest's gun and kicked the box lightly. The box disappeared with the sound of glass bottles colliding. Bang! The gunshot was very abrupt. It came from the basement. Damn, what the hell is this? Ah. It was Reed's crazy curse. Damn. 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 Ah. Reed fired many shots in a row. It sounded like he was out of control. Lizu followed the sound and came to the entrance of the basement. Walking down, he first saw Reed, who was shooting randomly like crazy. The ceiling and the floor were all covered with bullet marks. Reed was panting heavily and walking uncontrollably. The monster confronting Reed had white skin and multiple long legs like a spider, with human-like hands at the end. It moved like a frog, jumping back and forth. It had no eyes, only a crack in the center of its body, revealing red flesh. It was ugly and weird. Just looking at this thing with your eyes would make your brain ache. But the monster jumped very fast and seemed to have good attack power. After a quick glance at the monster, Lizu's heart began to beat uncontrollably. He used to every time he was uncontrollably excited and went crazy after his heartbeat accelerated. He felt this way. He could never control that feeling freely. The alternation of reason and chaos and madness made him look neurotic and mentally decadent. But this time, he seemed to have found the cause of the madness. It's ridiculous to say that the reason for going crazy in the other two worlds actually appears here. Raise your hand and shoot. The monster is shot and falls to the ground. The degree of world exploration, 1%. Chapter 73 Divination. The monster died, and the madness covering its brain was blown away by the fan like a cloud. Reed finally controlled himself, stopped his crazy behavior, and sat on the ground gasping for air. What kind of monster is this? Reed glanced at the corpse on the ground, which had an ugly, strange appearance that was difficult to describe. Even though the thing had been destroyed, just looking at the corpse, Reed's mind was ready to go crazy again. He had to hold his breath and turn his head away to avoid falling into that uncontrollable and terrifying mental world again. There seemed to be wailing in the air, like a child, and a little like a woman, chanting, a strange sound from far to near. Reed's whole heart was hanging. Boom. The shelves in the basement were knocked over, and another monster similar to the previous one jumped out. It was smaller. Reed subconsciously raised his gun and aimed at the monster, resisting the madness that was hitting his brain like a wave, and fired. Caca. The bullets had already been fired. Bruce. Reed could only hope for that weird colleague. Bruce? Where is he? Lizu, who was squatting on the ground poking at the monster's corpse, raised his head strangely. Hurry, he's behind you. Reed yelled. His reminder was still a step too late. The monster with multiple limbs had already pounced on Lizu's back. But what shocked Reed even more was that Lizu suddenly turned around and grabbed the monster, holding its limbs with one hand and stood up. Reed's throat squeezed out a sound with difficulty. Ha 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 ha. A strange and rapid laugh broke out. Lizu just held the monster and laughed strangely. Bruce Wayne? Reed approached tentatively, wanting to ask how this guy who had experienced life and death together was doing, but the way he leaned back and laughed was too scary, stopping Reed from approaching. Ahem. Haha. Lizu reached out to wipe away his tears. The smile finally subsided, and the monster in his right hand had turned into a soft plush doll, but it still remained hideous. What is this? Reed also discovered this, and it was even more difficult to control the shock in his heart. A monster that can cause madness in people's hearts was turned into a rag doll, even though the appearance of this rag doll is still hideous and terrifying. It seems that our investigation will continue. Lizu tucked the rag doll under his armpit. He was completely interested in this matter. Yeah, Reed nodded, not investigating why Lizu could turn the monster into a furry rag doll. He stood up, walked around the corpse, and pushed open a door in the basement. There was a corpse hanging on the wall. Gorilla face? Lizu had come to the bottom of the corpse. He held the monster doll under his left armpit and pinched his chin with his right hand, observing like a detective. He is Albert, the target we are looking for this time, but it looks like he seems to have encountered misfortune. Reed nodded and observed the corpse. He was shot in the middle of his eyebrows. The man intended to kill him, not just to chase him. But all this still doesn't make sense. They said Albert has the ability to infect people and make people crazy. Could it be that Lewis was affected in this way? It seems that only by finding Lewis can all this be explained. Reed ended his brief inference and turned around to find that Lizu had disappeared. Reed, who was afraid that Lizu would linger on the corpse of the monster, followed closely. Reed took it and let him breathe a sigh of relief. Lizu did not squat on the ground and continue to poke the corpse, but took a letter and read it carefully. Seeing Reed coming over, Lizu handed the letter to Reed. Lizu, who knew limited words, could hardly really understand the meaning of the letter. This is Lewis' letter. It seems that he accidentally left this letter when he came here to deal with Albert's body. Now the town is completely blocked. Lewis will definitely not escape from here. He has only this place to hide. Reed held the letter with a firm expression. Lewis owes a lot of money to the tavern owner. He can only go there. We should act, Bruce. Reed has been calling Lizu consciously. Although his behavior is weird, Lizu's high fighting power is the best guarantee for Reed to continue investigating the case in this strange town. Bruce? Reed shouted again when he found that Lizu did not answer. Ah, Bruce is here? Lizu turned his head quickly, as if looking for Bruce. You're not Bruce? Oh, that's right, Bruce. He nodded seriously, as if he had just remembered. I'm Bruce. Bruce Wayne, right? Reed, who had long been accustomed to his nervousness, just nodded. They came out of the basement and walked towards the only tavern in the town. Lizu had no idea how the case happened. Of course, for him, no matter who killed whom, it was boring enough. Living and exploring the unknown is the fun of life. Of course, don't be less laughing, otherwise life must be particularly boring. Neat Tavern, a tavern in the town of Oakmont, pushed open the door, and two listless men walked in and immediately attracted the attention of several people in the tavern. Strangers muttered the identities of the two people with disgusted eyes, and they continued to work on their own drinks. I'll go ask the boss. Reed took the letter and walked towards the bar. Lizu sat at a table very familiarly, supporting his side face and listening to the conversation at the next table. It's all those damn Innsmouth people. Since they came here, the town has been flooded, and they can always catch more fish with their ugly fish faces, but we can only drink here. The wine glass hit the table with great force. Innsmouth. This was not the first time Lizu heard about Innsmouth people, but without exception, there was no positive evaluation. Want divination? A black shadow sat opposite Lizu. It was an African American woman with a knotted hair and a strange decoration tied on it. Her face was also painted with bright oil paint. I can see your future. I don't have the money of this era. Lizu raised his index finger and scratched his cheek. With his other hand, he took out a wrinkled green banknote from his pocket. This was the 2015 version of the printed banknote. Will Franklin accept it? The African American woman's eyes did not stop at the banknote. She kept staring at Lizu. The transportation here is blocked, and there is no communication with the outside world. Money here is just waste paper. You can take out something useful, such as bullets, gold, or your patent leather boots, or this windbreaker. That looks very expensive. I have sweaty feet. Lizu took out 2 bullets from his pocket. I have never seen a bullet before. Maybe I can sell it for a good price. The African American woman put away the bullets, closed her eyes, and her thick lips trembled, as if she was praying to a god. A few minutes later, she opened her eyes. If she hadn't knocked on the table lightly, Lizu might have had a dream. Yawn. How is it? Lizu asked, stretching lazily. She stared into Lizu's eyes earnestly, and uttered the mysterious prophecy. Fate is destined. Reincarnation is always with you. When the blue is filled, even death cannot help you escape from the choice. Chapter 74. The Innsmouth Man. Lizu nodded seriously, took out 2 more bullets, and placed them in front of the African American woman. Which god do you believe in? Compared to the woman's weird and confusing questions, it is more important to satisfy his inner curiosity. Do you believe in the existence of God? The African American woman was not slow. She picked up the bullet in front of her. I didn't believe it before, although I have seen it. Lizu turned sideways and found that Reed was walking towards this side after negotiating. Well, the god of the world. Which god do you believe in? Lizu asked. I don't know its name. Its appearance is hard to describe, even in the dream that is closest to it. I can't peek into its true appearance. The African American woman said. Her blank eyes also confirmed that she knew nothing about the god she believed in. Bruce, he is upstairs. We should continue to investigate the case. Reed had already walked over and interrupted their conversation. Goodbye, ma'am. After Lizu stood up, he bowed like a gentleman and followed Reed upstairs. Knock knock. Reed raised his hand to knock on the door and cast a look at Lizu, indicating that he was on the alert. The guy living in the room was a murderer. The door opened, and the first person to come out was an ugly fish face. The bald fish face head grew on a fat human body. Who are you? The fish face man was a little unhappy. With his ugly appearance and fat body, he was very oppressive. Are you Lewis? Reed asked. Yes. What do you want to talk to me about? Finding that 2 strangers asked his name directly, the fish face man's tone was a little nervous, and his expression. It was still the fish face, and there was no expression. I have a question, Lizu suddenly said. Why do you look like this? Compared with the white ape-like Throgmorton family, the fishman's head was really weird. Why? Do you think I should be humiliated and killed by you, just because I look like this? Lewis was a little out of control when his unique appearance was mentioned. I don't mind doing this, Lizu nodded. Leave the rest of the questioning to me. Reed quickly stopped the conversation between Lizu and Lewis. He was really afraid that, if they continued to talk, Lizu would directly draw his gun and kill Lewis, or turn Lewis into a fish-faced puppet. That would be detrimental to the investigation. Albert Throgmorton is dead. He was shot in the middle of the forehead. Now Robert has blocked the entire town. Lewis, do you know what this means? A pointed threat. Fear can be seen from that fish face. I said, you shouldn't go to the beach. Nothing good will happen at all. Lewis cursed. Reed shrugged. He was just a detective, not a psychologist. He didn't want to appease the mood of the irritable fishman. With Lizu here, he believed that he was absolutely safe. This was also the worst way to deal with it. Mind telling me what happened? Reed asked. You have to promise not to expose me. That ape-faced guy will definitely kill me. He has hated the people of Innsmouth for more than a day or 2. If you give me enough clues, I will consider it. Despicable outsider. Lewis knew he had no choice. He could only curse helplessly and then choose to confess the truth. I'm a fisherman. In the morning, I went to the beach with some friends I live with. I have said many times that nothing good will happen if you go to the beach. We found a lifeboat on the beach, the Titania, with the unconscious Albert Throgmorton on it. Although I hate those monkeys, I still saved him. We took Albert home and waited for Throgmorton's monkeys to pick him up, but Albert suddenly went crazy, and finally my brain also became crazy. I don't know what happened. When I regained consciousness, Albert was already dead, and I still had a gun in my hand. I could only hide the body and find a place to hide. At this point, Lewis gritted his teeth again. Damn old Peter, he actually betrayed me. This matter has nothing to do with others, but I believe what you said, Reed said. After this period of investigation, I, an outsider, can understand how crazy it is to kill the heir of the Throgmorton family in Oakmont. Now I should go back and report. You promised me that you wouldn't tell anyone that I killed Albert. The fish-faced man was still reminding him, wanting to hear Reed's promise. I keep my word. Unless it's necessary. Reed left an ambiguous answer and turned to leave. Lizu, however, remained at the door, staring at the fish-faced man. Do you have anything else to do? Lewis was a little afraid of Lizu. Although this guy was wearing expensive clothes, he could always see some unreasonable funny things in him. I'm very curious about that Innsmouth. Can you tell me about it? Lizu asked, stroking his chin. You can definitely know more than I do if you just take a page of the newspaper. I'll definitely go to that place when I have time. Is that place full of fish-faced guys like you? Humph. Lewis snorted coldly, retreated back to the room, and violently slammed the door. Bang, the door closed violently. Lizu looked at the closed door, but couldn't help laughing. Innsmouth must be a good place to go. He also thought that he had a year, which was enough time for him to visit. To be honest, I don't like seafood very much. He wrinkled his nose. At the entrance of the Knee Tavern, Lizu and Reed parted ways again. Reed had completed the task of finding Albert. He should go back to hand in the task. If everything goes well, he may catch the last ship and leave this strange town overnight. Lizu put one hand in his pocket. After being turned down several times on the roadside, he finally found out the location of the N3 port, a place called Grimhaven Bay. The gorilla-faced Albert was crazy, a monster that made people crazy. The unknown was like a big hand, tempting Lizu to continue exploring. The faster he explored the gorilla-faced Albert and the Titania, the faster he could find the truth. I really have some detective ideas. It is impossible to walk from the bar to Grimhaven Bay. There was a big flood here, and many roads were submerged, causing half of the town to look like Venice. The locals were very hostile to outsiders, which made this exploration operation more difficult. When Lizu arrived at the N3 dock, it was dark. In order to hurry on, he was exhausted physically and mentally. The damp town, the sticky air, the port with a strong fishy smell in the darkness, the oppression makes people have to breathe quickly. Lizu grinned meaninglessly. The more this happened, the harder it was for him to control his body. That was why Lizu was happy. He was approaching the thing that made him crazy, crossing time and space, the thing that made him crazy. N3 pier, stepping on the wooden board smeared with strange mucus, turning around the iron net, the sea appeared in front of him. The guiding light on the lighthouse was like the devil's one eye. Lizu looked at the dark sea. Bang. It was like a heavy object was hitting the iron door. Bang. Very rhythmic. Occasionally, there would be two sudden and rapid hits. In the port, where there was only the sound of waves, the collision sound could be heard clearly from a long distance. Ah. Damn it. An old voice cursed. Is there anyone who comes to save me? Damn it. No matter who it is. Thank you book friend 161,021,163,531,151 for the reward of 100 starting coins. Thank you Sheoji Mayo for the reward of 100 starting coins. And thank you Bazimwine for the reward of 500 starting coins. Chapter 75 The Strange Man and the Old Night Watchman. In the dark night, the old night watchman held a shotgun in his left hand and leaned against the door with his right hand. He stared at the door with his eyes through the reflection of the moonlight. Bang! The sound of impact came again. The power of that thing was not particularly strong, but it was like a machine that never knew fatigue. From the beginning to now, it has never stopped. Is there anyone who can save me? Until now, the old night watchman can only hope for passers-by. But how could anyone come to the dock in the town, where it was already dark? It's all that bastard ship, that bastard Sanders. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't have to hold a shotgun and stare at this shaking broken door in the middle of the night. If I survive this time, I must replace the door with an iron one. The old night watchman cursed. and he could only use this way to give himself courage. The impact outside did not slow down or stop because of his cursing, and it still used a strange frequency. The strange howling that loomed in the air touched the soul, making the old night watchman more excited. Bang! It was the sound of gunfire, and the old night watchman shuddered. Bang! 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 Several shots were fired without pause. Someone is here to save me. This was the first thought of the old night watchman. After a series of rapid shots, the gunshots stopped. Knock knock. The door panel was knocked lightly, and the old night watchman opened the door hesitantly. What he saw was a monster with many legs. Ah! The old night watchman was frightened and hid back, and raised his old hunting rifle to prepare to shoot. At this time, he also found that the monster with many legs had been killed, and was being held in the hands of a man wearing a windbreaker and a weird smile. Yellow people are rare here, even rarer than the people of Innsmouth. The old night watchman shouted fiercely, "Damn it, what are you doing? Aren't you afraid? Aren't you crazy?" Listening to the other party's strange muttering, the old night watchman shot back, "I'm already crazy, don't expect to scream when you see the corpse." The old night watchman put down his gun. After all, the other party saved his life. He looked past the weirdo and saw 7 or 8 multi-legged monsters, which had turned into corpses and slumped on the ground, just like the one the weirdo was holding. In the dark harbor, someone could quickly kill those ugly monsters with bullets. The person in front of him must also be a monster. The old night watchman who put down his gun soon regretted doing so. He should have killed the other party with a single shot. The corpse of the monster was thrown on the ground. The weirdo nodded and raised a pistol with a strange shape and a very long barrel, pointing it at the old night watchman's head. "Is a Titania here?" "Titania? That damn ship is in the harbor. Right there." The old night watchman pointed to a large ship anchored in the distance. "If there are still people alive on the ship, whether they are monsters or people, kill them all with your weird gun." The other party did not refuse. Lizu held the pistol and walked towards the harbor with his shoulders slumped. The old night watchman's cursing behind him was still clear. He stepped on the corpse of the monster with many legs, and the monster was shot with a strange liquid oozing out of the muzzle. At the dock, there were corpses of people lying in all directions. Lizu's nose twitched slightly, and he squatted down and poked the corpse closest to him. Just dead. Gunshot wound. A big melee took place here. It had nothing to do with monsters, but a fight between crew members, an indiscriminate and crazy fight, which seemed to have no purpose. Everyone was like a wooden stake, fighting in place. Lizu, who had seen all kinds of fighting scenes, could only explain this battle as a madman going crazy. After all, except for a madman who would not care about his own life, not dodge or evade, just to kill for the sake of killing. Lizu stepped over the worthless corpses and came to the Titania. Sure enough, he walked into the cabin, and there was a contract inside. The general content of the contract was that the expedition team under the name of the Slogmorton family rented the Titania with 70 bullets. The old night watchman looked at the single bed, sighed, moved a chair to the wooden door, and sat on the chair with his shotgun, using his body weight to hold the door. Alas. He thought to himself whether he should retire, but people who don't work in Oakmont don't have social welfare. The simplest survival skill in the past, fishing, is no longer competitive in front of the people of Innsmouth. The EOD group. He thought of the charity organization. Knock 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 on the door. Who is it? The old night watchman is now very excited. Are all the people on the boat dead? A question came from outside the door. Yes, all dead. The old night watchman answered impatiently. Knock knock. Knock on the door again. What are you doing again? Don't think that you saved my life, so I have to keep answering your questions. The muzzle of the old night watchman's shotgun was already pointed at the wooden door. His head is still a little out of control now. No, it should be said that it is getting more and more out of control. There is a strange gurgle sound. It is the multi-legged monster that besieged him for half a night. The old night watchman couldn't help but look out through the crack of the door. It was indeed that kind of monster, and it was being held in the weirdo's hand, baring its teeth and claws at the door. Arsehole, arsehole, what are you doing? Where did you catch this damn thing? The old night watchman had already stood up and pointed his gun at the door. He was going to shoot to kill the monster and the weirdo with one shot. After the old night watchman stood up, the door was violently kicked open, and the white monster came over in a parabola and hugged the old night watchman's face. The cold touch, with the salty smell of seawater, the end was like a human hand grabbing the back of his head and pinching his hair. The madness and suffocation were no longer under control, but before the old night watchman went crazy, the monster had been taken away. Huff, huff, huff. The old night watchman panted a few times before he calmed down. Better? A painless voice came, and the weirdo was sitting on a chair at the door, with a monster-like puppet in his arms and a shotgun that belonged to the old night watchman in his hand. Where did you get this from? Was it all hallucinations? The old night watchman was a little confused. He looked at the puppet in the weirdo's arms, and couldn't understand why someone would play with such a weird crazy toy. Yes, he thought that what he saw just now was an illusion. The weirdo just smiled. What happened to the Titania? The old night watchman, who knew the power of the shotgun, was pointed at his head and swallowed his saliva. Some time ago, an expedition team rented the entire Titania to sail. They were the expedition team organized by Throgmorton. That day I saw Albert Throgmorton on it. Just today, they came back. They also brought back that kind of thing. The old night watchman pointed at the monster puppet. They went crazy and killed each other. I hid here and didn't make a sound, so I escaped. Are they all dead? That bastard Sanders is not dead yet. He was chopped with an axe by a crazy crew member. The old night watchman pointed at his chest and gestured where the axe was chopped down. That's all I know. Can you put the gun? The weirdo moved the shotgun away. If Reed were here at this time, he would definitely know what happened, the weirdo said to himself as he left. The shotgun was thrown into the arms of the old night watchman. The figure left in the moonlight and walked farther and farther away. The old night watchman swallowed his saliva and held the shotgun, but did not dare to shoot. He had a strong feeling that, if he raised the gun, he would be killed. A few hours later, a foreigner with a scar on his face, who was also in a depressed state, arrived. Charles Reed, a private detective who came to this isolated town with Lee Zoo. Is the Titania parked here? He walked around the corpse of the monster on the ground with fear and asked the old night watchman. Damn, you foreigners. The old night watchman cursed. Foreigner? Could it be Bruce? Reed muttered. Did a yellow man with a long windbreaker and a dull face come here before? He asked the old night watchman. Yes, that rude bastard. The old night watchman cursed. Is he investigating this, too? Reed wondered, but looking at the monster corpses scattered all over the ground, he couldn't find a second person to look for. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.